In 6 hours, we'll pull the curtains down for the year 2022, and the clock for another 365 days of 2023 will begin ticking. Good evening. I'm Chamberlain Oso here in Abuja, welcoming you to 2022 in retrospect. It's a highlight of some of the events that shaped the year. We'll also have our guest proffer solutions for better performances for 2023 where necessary, but not without taking a look at some of the highlights of 2022. But I'm not alone. Millicent joins me from Lagos.
Hi, Chamberlain. Good to see you and good evening. I'm Millicent Walker in Lagos. I mean, what a year it's been, from the political tension preceding an election year to numerous concerns over security threats from the north to the south, and one of the longest industrial actions by the Academic Staff Union of Universities, ASUU. It was a year that Nigerians may not forget in a hurry.
Oh, yes, indeed, Millicent, and it's one of such that will be going down memory lane. And, of course, looking forward to see how, where, what did we do in 2022? What were the key highlights? And what are the lessons learned in 2022 such that there will be a better performance for the year 2023? So it promises to be quite interesting.
Those are gunshots. Those are gunshots. 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 Gunshots.
Well, security was a challenge in the year. Armed robbers attacked a bullion van in Ibadan, the Oyo State capital, killing 6 people, including, unfortunately, 2 policemen.
The policeman has been shot. You can see the cartridges. You can see the cartridges. The policeman has been shot. As you can see the cartridges. The policeman has been shot. You can see the hillocks. You can see the hillocks. Policeman has been shot. Policeman has been shot.
In a separate incident, motorcycle-riding armed terrorists ran riot, unleashing mayhem in what has now gone down as one of the deadliest attacks in the country, killing at least 200 people who were later buried. Thousands of others were displaced in Zamfara State in the northwestern part of the country.
And of course, we cannot forget in a hurry, a Kaduna-bound train was attacked by armed bandits, and at least 8 passengers were killed, while 168 others were kidnapped. Many were held for months.
It wasn't all doom and gloom. Toby Amushan took the athletics world by storm. She clocked 12.12 seconds in the women's world 100-meter hurdles, breaking a 16-year record at the 2022 Commonwealth Games, which is now being ratified by the World Athletics Championships. Well, yes, Argentina also won the World Cup, but the football world was stunned with the passing of the greatest footballer of all time, Edson Arantes do Nascimento, popularly called Pelé.
Well, that is true, but back home, a grim picture was painted by the Multidimensional Poverty Index, MPI report released by the National Bureau of Statistics this year, putting the number of Nigerians living in poverty at 133 million out of a population of over 200 million.
Well, similarly, UNESCO, which indicated that Nigeria now has about 20 million out-of-school children. However, one of those events where the phrase "never again" is ideal is where we begin.
Well, enter the 5th generation after the initial hoopla over 5G telecommunication technology. The industry took a step further with the rollout of 5G network. Now, the executive vice chairman of the NCC, Professor Umar Dambata, said that the 5G network would bring substantial network improvements, not just that, higher connectivity, mobility and capacity, as well as low latency capabilities to communication services in the country.
Well, similarly, UNESCO, I beg your pardon, on the international scene, billionaire businessman and CEO of Tesla, Elon Musk, completed the $44 billion acquisition of Twitter amid warnings from campaigners and politicians that hate speech on the platform must be held in check. He went on and marked the transaction with a post to his now 123 million plus subscribers, describing the bird is free.
Oh, that created kind of like a lot of ruckus. But then, speaking of international news, in the twilight of the coronavirus pandemic, Russia invaded Ukraine. But of course, it calls it a special military operation. Well, the effects are being felt across the world. And also, King Charles III became Britain's new monarch.
It was indeed a dramatic year. Gunmen attacked an advanced team of presidential aides, resulting to the injury of 2 people. The assailants opened fire on the convoy from an ambush position, but were repelled by the military, police, and DSS personnel who were accompanying the convoy. It must have been a horrific experience, perhaps similar to those of the survivors of the Abuja-Kaduna train attack.
It's one ambush too many, and the military is not taking it lying low as they vow to track down the terrorists who have wreaked havoc on the train conveying passengers from Abuja to Kaduna. So far, some bodies have been recovered, with many wounded and receiving treatment in hospital. One of them, a former deputy governor of Zamfara State. The Chief of Defense Staff, General Loki Rabo, leads a team, including the Inspector General of Police, to the scene of the attack. And he says those responsible will be apprehended and face the wrath of the law.
It's very sad that in this 21st century, we still have heartless individuals who want to make life unbearable for the rest of the citizens. This is dastardly act, but I'd like to assure you that those behind it will not go unpunished. Security, like I have always said and maintained, is everybody's business. Beyond that, here what you find is what I consider to be a calculated attempt. I'm sure, given the geography of what you just said, that it must have been something that was timed, that was deliberate. But then, of course, we build on this knowledge and then to be able to go after them. What I like to assure Nigerians is that those who indeed were responsible for this dastardly act will be punished and they'll be brought to justice. That is an assurance. And then to also say that the armed forces, the police, and of course security agencies, intelligence and security agencies remain very committed to ensuring that we have peace within our land. I'm sure if not for this very ignoble act of yesterday, for a long time we have had some form of reprieve. But of course we are not resting on our laurels. We're going to build on some of the lessons we've learned and then to see how well to drive it forward.
Hours later, the Chief of Army Staff, Lieutenant General Farouk Yahya, and his team also visits the scene of the train attack. The team inspects the damaged train at Dutse village in Chukun local government area, just few kilometers to the Regasa train station, which is the last transit point of the train. The Nigerian Railway Corporation has temporarily suspended rail operations along that axis. October last year, there was a similar attack by bandits who detonated explosives on the rail tracks, forcing a disruption of train services on the route.
There watching 2022 in retrospect, a highlight of some of the key events that shaped 2022. We'll, of course, look ahead to 2023, hoping that we'll learn some lessons. We'll have a lineup of experts who will join us on the program today to take us through what transpired. They'll give us their impressions and make recommendations where necessary. Well, you can always go ahead and be a part of the program. You get to see some of how you will. But we'll start off on a security front today. And we do have General Abdurrahman Dambazar, who is a former Chief of Army Staff. He's also former Minister of Interior and President, Nigerian Society of Victimology. Good evening, General. Thank you for joining us on 2022 in retrospect today. Well, General, we do hope that you can hear me, but we're starting on security note today on the program. So could you just go ahead and give us your impression about how 2022, which will end in a couple of hours, turned out for you on a security note?
5th of June 2022. Christian faithful gathered at St. Francis Catholic Church in Owo Town, Ondo State, Southwest Nigeria, for their annual Youth Harvest event. The service was at its peak when an unexpected disruption turned the day into chaos and mourning for the worshippers. Eyewitness accounts say the building was rattled by an explosion before gunmen made their way into the church and began shooting with abandon.
The father was liberated. Then this Boko Haram come inside the church, blowing bomb, shooting aside. Then members of the church are running away. Some flow for the back, some flow they start shooting some people from leg. They get one woman for back, for face, others shooting the leg, shooting. So and now father now escaped, go inside the house. As that thing is after them, the soldiers, before the soldiers come, they don't escape.
The attackers flee the scene, leaving their mark. Men, women, and children killed. Word of the attack spreads, and nearby churches promptly shut their doors.
I was in my church at Revelation Parish. Today is our service. What do we call it? That is a children harvest. So what really happened today? When we had a battle, all what happened, our church was down.
The Ondo State Governor Rotimi Akeredolu, who was attending to party matters in Abuja, promptly left for his state. His arrival at the scene of the attack a short while later sparked off another round of angry emotions, especially as this carnage happened in his hometown, and he has strong words for the perpetrators. A day that was designed for celebration has turned out to be quite the opposite. What many hope for is that this incident does not further increase the anxiety of Nigerians who are already struggling to cope with increasing cases of insecurity across the country.
Welcome back. You're still watching 2022 in retrospect here on Channels Television. And we will be going back to Abuja, where Chamberlain is, of course, and to our guest who will be joining us shortly. We had introduced him earlier, and that is the former Chief of Army Staff, also former Minister of Interior, and also President, Nigerian Society of Victimology, General Abdurrahman Dambazar. But let's begin on security here in Lagos. And joining me live in the studio is Mr. Fola Arthurwari. He is the former CEO, Lagos State Security Trust Fund. Good to have you. Compliments of the season.
Thank you very much.
How would you describe 2022 in terms of security?
Generally, you mean nationwide?
Yes.
Challenging, I would say it's challenging, and I'm sure those involved directly in managing it would say so. Challenging.
When you compare it to 2021?
You have major incidents like the train attack and so on. So I think it's been very dynamic. Efforts have been made, but I think, and this is just an opinion that some other people, I think that perhaps earlier there was a bit of hesitancy or slowness in confronting or addressing it. I recall that the Minister of Defense, current. I recall some months back he had said that the army had to change from a defensive stance to an offensive one. There were all kinds of reports about the reluctance of the police in some parts to proceed against a particular class of alleged criminals because of their perception of the political situation, all manner of things. But I think security has been like a hydra-headed monster. You cut it down here, it pops up there. I mean, just recently we had the mass killings in Benue and Kaduna, southern Kaduna. We had about a week ago 4 Kogi students of the Kogi Polytechnic kidnapped. It's an ongoing thing. Efforts are being made, but I think certain steps need to be taken urgently to put more men in the field because it's so widespread, the southeast. Recently we heard about the Ikom highway in Calabar. You know, it's like, you know, this, what do you call that, pop a mole, that game, you knock here, it pops up here. Yeah, but I think efforts are being made, but it's going to cost us a lot, and it's going to be quite a number of years before we can, you know.
But in terms of cost, we got one of the biggest, talking about defense and, you know, security.
They are not, you mean the budget?
Yes.
You have to remember that most of the stuff we use is imported. And your currency has lost half its value. So you don't get excited by those figures. Those are, I mean, you're almost looking at the same numbers as last year's budget. But the actual value of the money is not the same. So, but the police have their trust fund, which we don't hear much about, but it should give them quite some support outside of the budget.
Are you worried that another sum we don't hear much about is the security votes?
I don't know what that is. There's no such thing. And let me say it here, at least I was in government, I was in cabinet. I don't know what people refer to when they say security vote. I don't know what it is. Is it some specific payment? And there's no such thing. If it's money drawn from the budget, then it's constrained by the size of the budget. I honestly hear people referring to it all the time. But when I was in Lagos State, right from PAMSEC through commissionership, there was never any reference to a security vote. Maybe some people have the perception that there's some fund somewhere, maybe at the center, from which payments are made every month to the governors, but I'm not aware of security. What I know is there's a budget, and there are heads in the budget which refer to security. And strictly speaking, security budgets are federal, because it's federal that controls all those agencies. The states just come in as contingency because of underfunding at the center. So that's my view. I may be wrong. Somebody might challenge me on that. But
well, do you also think that a bit of this unaccountability or lack of transparency in this affects
people keep talking about that. There is nowhere in the Constitution, and the Constitution is the main document, that says that any expenditure of government is free of oversight. No, it's a perception that we carried over from the military. The Public Accounts Committee of the House, be it the national or state, has the power to inquire into any. So any money spent outside of that is an unconstitutional expenditure. So there is no law that says that security funding shall be unaccountable. I remember the late NSA that died in the helicopter crash. I remember he was being interviewed on this channel some years back, and the same thing was put to him, and he said categorically that there is nothing like security vote. What you have is that each agency charged with security has a budget which has to go to the National Assembly for approval. And that same National Assembly has the power to oversight and question the expenditure. At best, they'll make it, what do you call it, a closed hearing, just to protect, you know, the details. But there is nothing like unaccountable expenditure in Nigeria. We shouldn't give people the excuse to do that.
I want to come to Lagos State, and this is with regards to your experience in terms of the year.
Yes.
in terms of security?
In Lagos?
Yes.
It's a perception thing, isn't it? I mean, I think what the aim of any security structure is to create a relative absence of fear. That's it. You can't get a perfect score, but if you encourage people to believe that there is a system in place, then they would go about their business with the relative absence of fear. So I think relatively, and compared to, say, the early 2000s and so on, I think Lagos is doing pretty well because they've got a structure. You know, the rapid response squad, it's funded both from the trust fund and the government and private sector. But I would say something that it's still an under-resourced in terms of manpower system. And as you know, it's the federal that deploys men. And I don't think Lagos has enough.
For its population.
That's why it had to set up the neighborhood watch and the other agency that it created, just to give some meat to that. One thing that disturbs me, and I will keep saying it in any forum, is the abuse of the VIP protection system, which has undermined the capacity of the police to properly police the space. You have thousands of armed police officers, many of them supposedly mobile police. And mobile police were supposed to be a strike force in the event of breakdown of law and order, but it has been depleted by the, and I think that the government should bring an end to this system, which has been gravely abused. I can understand protection for people like the president, the vice president, governors, the deputy, and heads maybe of other agencies whose incapacitation will affect the running of the state. That's everywhere in the world you have that. But here, it's everybody. It's businessmen, it's pastors, it's, it's ridiculous. Who pays for the guns? Public funds. Who pays for the training of these officers? The public.
And don't they pay to?
I'm not, it's not official. There's nowhere in any regulation that is official. Nobody knows what the situation is, how it's reviewed, etc. Policemen are not supposed to be guarding particular people, right? And their job is enforcement of law and protection of lives and property. We agree, like I said, by convention, political heads get a level of protection, and people who are involved in criminal cases, who are witnesses or informants and so on, and against whom threats have been made, are entitled for a while to police protection. But to give 5-6 mobile policemen to a man for 24 hours of the day is an abuse of process. So that would increase the number of policemen available for patrols and other things.
Well, we'll come back to discussing this. Right now, we need to go on a break. You're still watching 2022 in retrospect here on Channels Television. Welcome back to our special here on Channels Television. And of course, we are talking security sector. I've been discussing with my guest here in the studio, who is Mr. Arthur Worry. And also, Chamberlain, I believe you have something for us. James?
Well, I hope I have General Abdurrahman Dambazal this time. General, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you, Chamberlain. Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you. He can't hear me.
Okay. Okay.
I can hear you.
I was going to say, General, if you didn't hear me, then it will be on 2022, not on us, on a lighter note. But let's go ahead and get your perspectives on this matter. I mean, having seen the way 2022 almost ending now, the way we've gone about security, yes, the law did stipulate that the primary purpose of government is the safety of lives and the welfare of the citizenry. So from your perspective, having been there, how do you, in terms of our performance, how we've approached protecting, ensuring that every Nigerian feels safe. What do you think how it has fared in 2022?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me for this program, which is on the eve of the new year. And hopefully, we would pray that the new year 2023 will be better than the 2022. Of course, every year has its own challenges because life itself is dynamic. And in terms of security, I believe that the military has done very well, considering all factors. Specifically, when I refer to the Northeast insurgency and terrorism, that group has been degraded and almost dismantled. This being attested by the Global Terrorism Index 2022, which clearly put it there that when you compare to 2015, the number of deaths from terrorism in the Northeast reduced by 92%, from 2,125 to 178 deaths. So I think generally overall, the military has done very well there. Of course, that's not to say that we are seeing the end of it. Like I've always said that the insurgency in the Northeast is just not in the Northeast of Nigeria. It is a regional problem which also affects all the Lake Chad Basin Commission countries. That is Cameroon, Chad, Niger. And also it even extends to other countries in the Sahel. So it's a regional issue beyond Nigeria. And this is why Nigeria has been leading in the consolidating the operations of the Multinational Joint Task Force, which is based in Chad. And of course, when you look at 2022, also we have other security challenges in the Northwest, the banditry, the kidnapping, and so on and so forth. We also have challenges in the Southeast, the IPOP issue, which is threatening elections in the Southeast, which is the next major event that this country is going through in 2023. That's the elections. And of course, in the North Central, we have challenges of the hardest farmers conflict, and also some issues of banditry activities. So almost every geopolitical zone has something to contribute towards insecurity. But as I said, that it was a challenging year, and we do hope that 2023 will be better. When we talk of issue of security, we will not be limiting it to the physical aspect, but also there is the human aspect of security, which it is not the use of force that can solve it, but good governance. The issue of education, the issue of health care services, the issue of environment, the issue of poverty, the issue of employment or unemployment. So these are issues that require good governance, and they are fundamental issues when you talk of security. I'm not implying that, for instance, that poverty causes insecurity, but it's a factor. So if you are able to reduce poverty, you are able to reduce unemployment, you are able to raise the standard of education, the quality, and also accessibility of education, then you will be able, by implication, be able to reduce these insecurity challenges.
Well, General, you've touched on a number of issues, and just as you also said, there are several factors to security or otherwise. But when you say the military has done very well, I didn't hear you mention the police, so probably you were going to come to it, because there are several people in the country who see things differently. For instance, the police are the people who relate on a first-line basis in terms of security agencies with the populace. So from that perspective as well, I mean, you've been Minister of Interior. You also have seen some of the challenges, the jailbreaks, those who are killed almost on a monthly basis this year, and how it appeared as though we had a challenge stemming the tide, despite several directives from the president, but we still saw those things happening. So from that perspective, does the government look at it as a complex whole to ensure that overall all security agencies are able to work together and ensure that Nigerians also see that they have done a lot to guarantee our safety?
Yes, you're quite right. I mentioned the military, with emphasis, because in this country, as of today, everybody's eyes is on the military. The military has been performing various tasks. And I agree that when it comes to law and order, the Nigerian police has the primary responsibility. But we are talking of a situation now whereby we have groups who are armed with military-grade weapons, attacking communities, attacking individuals on the highway, which to a large extent is beyond what the police can handle itself. But I quite agree that in order to even get it right, we must step backward to ensure that we have the kind of police this country requires in terms of their training, in terms of their discipline, in terms of their equipment. Quite a lot of activities of the police is being handled by the military. And this tells you that there is a problem in terms of the capacity of the police to handle it. But the Constitution is very, very clear that the police, the primary responsibility of law and order is in the police and other law enforcement agencies. So and I agree with you that tackling insecurity in the country, and that is why I mentioned these other issues of human security. Tackling insecurity in the country requires a kind of whole of government approach, whereby every ministry, department, and agency of government is involved in this issue. So it's not a one-man's business. Likewise, on the other hand, it requires the whole of society to come together to be able to tackle insecurity. So it's not just issue of government, it's not just issue of security agencies. It also has some civilian components in it. The civil society organizations, the media, professionals, they all come together to deal with it. Individuals, communities have to be part of it. So I agree with you in its totality. You cannot leave this issue to the military, and this is what I'm saying. So there is need for us to ensure that every sector understands this.
Now, at the moment, I mean, we saw this previous years, the last 3, 4, 5 years, but in 2022, it was also a feature to the extent that state governors kept on talking about reorganizing the structure of policing in this country. Now, almost in every state, there is one form of security outfit or the other. That speaks to the fact that there's a gap, there's something going on about policing that we need to address. Yet, we won't speak about the elephant in the room, policing, multi-leveled policing, to guarantee that kind of security that every citizenry can indeed say, well, yes, I not only am safe, I can feel it, I can see it because it's closer to me. What is your impression about this narrative about us reorganizing the structure of our policing in the country?
Let me tell you, Chamberlain, I'm for it. Anything that will ensure efficiency and effectiveness of policing is a welcome idea. So it's important that we look at the policing for like I mentioned, that the policing has been militarized because you see the policeman carrying a military-grade weapon, AK-47. So there is need to look at policing in a way that it will ensure confidence and trust between the public and the police. And it requires a lot in terms of their training, in terms of re-equipping them, in terms of their discipline, in terms of leadership. So these are things that we have to do. Whether you are talking of going for community policing, whether you are talking of going for state policing, whether you are talking of having layers of policing, what is important is that they must be effective and efficient in maintaining law and order in the society. And this is what the ordinary citizen want. The citizen want freedom from fear. So it's very, very important. You go out, you don't think that somebody will attack you. You are in your home, you know that you are at peace. That's what the citizen want. So if the structure of the police, the fear has been that once you have that kind of arrangement, the politicians, particularly the governors, are going to misuse it. Yeah, even if there's that fear, there should be some checks within the law that will prevent that. But overall, the important thing is that the question is the system, is the structure we have today has the capacity to deal with the issues of law and order? If the answer is yes, then we continue with it. If the answer is no, then we look at it again and provide alternative structure and test it to see how far we can go with that. So it's very important that we look at it very well. Yeah.
Well, General, just one more thing before we let you go. Section 4 of the Terrorism Prevention and Prohibition Act of 2022 gives some responsibility to the NSA, such that he's expected to formulate policies for the effective implementation and concerted counter-terrorism and terrorism financing efforts, among several other directives or at least responsibilities for the office of the NSA. Now, we spoke to several persons in different security agencies in the country. They feel alienated from some of the strategy being carried out by the government. In fact, some of them did say that they would like to see, in fact, both serving and retired security personnel. I should add that one. Now, some of them said that they want to see that there is a need, actually, for a national intelligence coordination center with all security agencies represented, and where they want all information analyzed into intelligence and then subsequently shared on the need-to-know basis as well as the need-to-share basis so that they will be seen to be working together. They think that this is what is missing from our current security architecture.
Yes, I agree with that perception. There's a gap in terms of the way the intelligence community works. Otherwise, some of the things that happen wouldn't even happen. The important thing is that that is one aspect. If you have the capacity to monitor, and you don't even have the capacity to respond, then your capacity to monitor becomes useless. If the capacity to monitor is one-sided and is not involving other persons or stakeholders that are supposed to know and act, then that also becomes useless. So it's very important that there is adequate coordination, cooperation, and collaboration. Coordination, cooperation, and collaboration among the security agencies, all stakeholders who are supposed to know and act. And I want to be sure that, I want to say that I think we should have more frequent sittings of National Security Council because if we have more frequent sittings of National Security Council, that is where some of these issues can be deliberated and decision taken. And so it's very important that all the stakeholders in the intelligence community come together and work together, because when you leave gaps, then there's bound to be loopholes for failure. And I suspect that was what happened with the attacks, the train attack along Abuja-Kaduna rail line, and also the Kuje prisons. Because these criminals, these violent criminals, were able to spend some hours during those incidents without response. So if we are able to improve, work together, share intelligence, and be able to respond as a community, then we'll be able to checkmate that kind of incidents from happening. So I totally agree with those who raise those concerns. And by the way, the office of the NSA is mainly to coordinate these activities. So if there is any observation that that coordination is not well done, then I think this is something that should be taken seriously.
All right. So quite a lot to dissect there, General. But we do thank you for your time here today, General Abdurrahman Dambazo, former Chief of Army Staff. And we wish you a very happy 2023, General.
And you too. I wish you well.
Mr.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you. Well, Mr. Athawari, I've heard a lot of people say time and again that we do not lack laws in this country, that we have a lot of those laws, but there's always something missing. So, well, in terms of whatever it is that is missing, but do you think that those laws, first, perhaps, I don't know if you think it's adequate, or is it just limited to implementation of those laws? Because there are several people who feel, to a large extent, they haven't seen justice not just being done or seen to have been done. They want to see a lot more with upholding the rule of law. And if that were, at least if it permeates our society, several people may just fall in line and then we may not have this kind of scenario we have in different parts of the country, or people taking laws into their hands?
Yeah, look, weak law enforcement is a petri dish from which terrorism and other crimes grow. Just take a drive along Lagos roads or roads in any part of the country and you see multiple breaches of the law. Let's take the traffic law. Why do developed countries concentrate so much on traffic? Because it is a crucial element of order. And when you have order, it is easier to, if you like, control crime. Our institutions are weak. The police has been so politicized that they don't seem to know what their function is anymore. Like I said, they've been captured by VIPs and politicians. They're not concentrating on enforcing the law. And I'm happy that one of the candidates for the presidential election has said specifically in his manifesto that is going to redeploy policemen attached to VIPs, and that was ASUU Tinubu. So, number one, the police have to re-engineer their approach to their role. What is the police role? Now, the police are expeditionary. That's what they do. They go on expeditions. They tell us after the fact. Their main role is to prevent crime. That's the first line in the constitution of police role. Prevention of crime. And then after that, protection of lives and property. But these days, what you hear is stories about the police that, oh, after XYZ were kidnapped, the police plus hunters, plus vigilantes, and so on, combed the bush and arrested 2 people or 3 people or 4 people. You never hear about the trials. You never hear about conviction. So it doesn't have the impact that it's supposed to have, which is to, part of what you call stopping people or making people think twice before going. But my main concern is that we are not enforcing the day-to-day laws of the country. There is public disorder. There is traffic disorder. There is general. So if you were to enter some spaces, you won't know whether there's a criminal act going on or not, because people drive against traffic, or they drive, on the 4th lane, which doesn't exist, and so on. So I think that the police should refocus on ensuring public order, so that people can go about, and then you can now start to escalate when the crimes are more serious. And I agree with the general that we need a new structure for the police. Let state police come into being so that governors can be held politically liable if there's crime in their neighborhoods.
I've just been told that we're now being joined by Major General Chris Musa. He's the Theatre Commander, Joint Task Force Northeast Operation Head in K. He's joining us from our Borno studio. Thank you and welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Major General, if you could just talk to us about some of the high points of your operations for Nigeria this year.
Please, can you say that again? I seem to be having some problem with reception.
The major high points in terms of security for the operation Hadinkai in 2022.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here again. Operation Hadinkai operations are on course. We have achieved so much this 2022. And we're sure that by 2023 it will be better. The Northeast is very, very peaceful. It's not yet over, but we're sure we're on top of the issues on ground.
And Major General, from what we hear, we understand that there was a lot of an increase in security operations this year, especially, the armed forces in the Northeast. We also understand that perhaps you might call some of the successes is that, about 82,000 terrorists and their families also surrendered this year. And of course, some of the abducted schoolgirls, were returned back home to their families. Some roads that were closed were also reopened. And, these are, some of the successes that we understand were recorded. But in terms of, addressing some of these security issues, do you think that if Nigeria addresses security in the northernmost part of the country, it would address security in Nigeria by a good number, 70 or 80%?
Yeah, for us here in the Northeast, I can speak for the Northeast, I think we are over 80%. And it is because we actually have understood what made the insurgents tick. We've been able to address those issues. Firstly, asymmetric warfare is people-centric. So we have made it such a point that everybody in the Northeast understands the situation, the challenges, and that everybody has a part to play in it, in the success. And we're receiving the best of cooperation from the locals, from the citizens, and that has actually made our job a lot easier. We work in close synergy with all security agencies, with the state government, with the locals, like I mentioned earlier, and all the stakeholders in the Northeast understand what is going on, and they're giving us all the support that we require.
In terms of manpower, has that been sufficient? Manpower and also some of the tools, the weapons that you use in your operations?
Yeah, the challenge of manpower will always be there. But we have a way around it. We have some equipment that came in. The Chief of Defense Staff and the service chiefs have done everything possible to ensure that we get the basic things that we need. And that has actually given us the advantage over the insurgents. And besides that, we work closely with the civil police, with the civil defense, and all other security agencies. So we have the number. We use that to build up our numbers. And again, we have the civilian JTF, who are the locals, and they have volunteered to take part. They have sacrificed so much too, and because they know the terrain quite very well. So we work in close proximity with them, and that has given us advantage. We don't have all we require, but what we have on ground has enabled us to achieve what we are doing. And especially the synergy between the services. I think that is fantastic. Just a few days ago, the Chief of Army Staff and the Chief of Air Staff came around for Christmas luncheon with the troops, where they came and just to boost the morale of the troops. I think that's something that we're doing. The Chief of Defense Staff is equally doing the same thing, the Chief of Naval Staff. And so this synergy, close cooperation between all the services has actually made this a lot easier. And that's why you see we're achieving the success we're getting.
And we do want to thank the armed forces, because it's definitely not easy. We lost a number this year as well. But some say that, from what's happening, the onslaught in the Northeast, the air bombardment and all of that is taking them to the Northwest. What's your thought, Mr. Othawari?
Honestly, it's not an area that I have much expertise on. My focus is more on civil policing. But I think they know their strategy, and I think... like I said, I mean, and as one of the speakers said, there's still a long way to go. We're still going to expend a lot of resources, and because, as I said, we seemed to have allowed it to grow to the extent that it's become so difficult to manage. But the military, they're professionals. I'm sure they have a grand strategy that will eventually, make it very difficult for these kind of things to happen.
Looking at perhaps what General Dambazao talked about, he said bad governance. He seemed to suggest that bad governance is very key. The unemployment, the poverty. And, in the North, for example, there's a larger number of out-of-school children. So, I mean, how do we sort of solve that in terms of governance now?
That's a generational issue to solve. And you can't wait for that. In fact, you need conditions of peace if you are going to, get children back into school, and improve governance. Your resources that you're expending on the insurgency itself makes it more difficult to deliver on some of the government essentials. But yes, I think, theoretically people say, oh, poverty is as a result of poor governance, that if you deal with the poverty or you deal with the unemployment, you'll deal with the crime. But let me tell you, a lot of criminals, it's not because of poverty. They just have, criminal intent, as it were. I mean, Spain, for instance, after the financial crisis, had 42% unemployment. But crime didn't go up suddenly because the institutions maintained their strength and so on. So I think for me, the starting point, the primary thing is to strengthen the institutions that are responsible for law and order and security. After that, we can then begin to engage on these issues. Because 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we didn't have all these issues. And governance wasn't perfect. So,
Major General Chris Musa, just to quickly ask you a few questions, and this is before we let you go. One question is that in terms of, some people say for peace to reign, let's dialogue, let's talk. Do you think that terrorists should be spoken to, that there should be dialogue when it comes to terrorists or handling terrorism in the country?
Most definitely. You find that what we're facing now is the kind of insurgency that has run through for 13 years. For us to be able to get this completely wrapped up, we need to be able to have the non-kinetic aspects, and this non-kinetic aspect has to do with good governance, reaching out to the commanders of these groups, including searching and looking out where are the sponsors. You can imagine that they'll be able to sustain this for 13 years. Where are they getting the funding from? Who is sustaining them? Who are their supporters? We know they have a lot of linkages from external forces and from within. So we should be able to do that. And then once we do that, as we're doing, and that's why you see as they're surrendering, we need to get the leaders. And then the leaders will see and understand that it is wise for them to hand up, to surrender. It is better for them to surrender and come out because they cannot sustain it. They have seen within themselves that they cannot take out the Federal Republic of Nigeria. They cannot face the armed forces. So it's good that we open other windows. As we're doing this, there will be dialogue behind the doors so that they give them a leeway for them to see, okay, we can exit, and then so that there will be peace because they know it's just a matter of time.
Another thing is that ransom is also being paid.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Major General, ransom is also being paid by those who are being kidnapped, by families. I mean, this is also happening.
Sorry, the formation is distorted. I can't really hear you quite well.
So, Major General, I was saying that ransom is also being paid. I mean, you've given your point of view about the kinetic and non-kinetic, and you're wondering, where the source of funding is coming from. But we know that those who have been kidnapped and those, these families have been paying ransom. And in some cases, the government has also paid ransom, to these terrorists as well. Major General, can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can't hear you quite well, but I heard you mention about the issue of the funding and it being sustained. I think we need to really find out where the funding, who are these sponsors? There's a lot of people that are still sponsoring them, both from externally and internally. We have worked adequately with the Joint Task Force because before now, whenever we conduct operations, they fizzle out into other countries, Cameroon, Chad, and Niger, and then come back. Now we have the Joint Task Force, multinational Joint Task Force. We have been working in synergy together with them. And then we have the Operation Emergence 4 of the Cameroonian Army and their Brigade Rapid Response of Cameroon. So we have the border areas too are also being manned. The challenge we're having now again is the Lake Chad area. We still have some openings there. Unfortunately, I can't hear you very well, but I think we're on course and we'll continue to do what we're supposed to do. Like we said, for us to address, just addressing some of the questions you asked the guests in the House, I think one mistake we make in the country is that we think security is only the business of the security forces. No, it is everybody's responsibility. And how do we start that? Let us start from home. What we're seeing, like the guest just mentioned, 20 years ago, we didn't have this. Then we had good parenting system. We had good schools. When these things collapsed, we ended up into insurgency. So we need to go back to be able to build up capacities from behind. Our schools must be in place. We must have good governance. We must be able to curtail and understand who are Nigerians. And how do we do that? We must have a database, build up these capacities. If we're able to put this in place, and then in primary schools, secondary schools, we do lectures, training. There should be subjects on security awareness. Most times you find that in villages, you see some people gathering a number of people, training them with arms and all, and nobody talks until it gets bad. Boko Haram, when it started, if we have nipped it in the bud, we don't have gotten to where we are today. So we must be proactive, and every Nigerian must take ownership of what is going on. It's not a Nigerian army issue or the Nigerian military or the Nigerian security agencies. It is everybody's responsibility. And it is better when we stop throwing blames at each other. We should look at it as a Nigerian project. For Nigeria to survive, we all have to put our hands together.
Very true. Major General Musa, final question, and this is a question I think you didn't hear at the time, and this is the question of ransom. What are your thoughts on that?
Sorry, I'm having a problem with the earpiece.
Paying ransom, you know, to terrorists. The question of ransom.
Oh, issue of ransom. No, we don't have issues on ransom here. I totally do not partake in anything on ransom, and we discourage that totally. And even the terrorists know we do not compromise on that. Issues of ransom, we don't go there.
Indeed.
We are giving them a window to surrender. Any of them who surrenders, we take him in, and the state government administers them, and will provide the security. The DDRR program is being planned both from the federal government and the state. I think that will take place very soon. The state government is doing the best they can for now to ensure that they handle the incident. Now we have over 83,000. Out of this number, 42,000 are children, 20-something thousand are women, and the rest are part of the men, where we have the terrorists and the other ones. So you see, they were building up a new generation of children, and that will have been most dangerous for the country, because if a child grows up believing that killing is natural, it becomes very dangerous. And so we're happy that they're out. We have encouraged those ones that are in, and we're receiving calls from them. They really want to handle. I think they are tired. They've understood. Those of them that have surrendered have told us in clear terms that they were deceived. They were told it was jihad, it was this, it was that, only to realize that their leaders were making brisk business. They were making money, and there were some people that were also using them for their own benefits. And a lot of them are out, and they're out for good, and they are never looking forward to going back. So we're appealing to all the other ones that are still there. They have the chance, they have the window to surrender. If they don't, and we get them, whatever comes out of that is their own calling.
Parting shot to you, Mr. Arthur Warre, in terms of, you know, what to look forward to in 2023.
Well, I think efforts are being made, but let me say, in response to the proposition that security is everybody's business, I say that that may be true, but it's the primary business of government, because most people do not have the capacity to respond to the level of violence and insecurity. Yes, they can give information, but people look to the government as the primary instrument. We've surrendered all our powers of violence to government to protect us. So government will make more efforts. Like I said, I don't see the situation dissipating in a long time, because it's gone so deep. And like you rightly said, I think it was reported that over R1 billion has been paid in ransoms for kidnaps across the country over the past 2-3 years, which in itself will be recycled into more violence. But I think that there's a determination on the part of government to, you know, ensure that normalcy is restored so that we can now talk about the good governance, investments, and so on that will address some of the problems that have arisen.
All right, we'll wrap that up. Lots of optimism from you.
Yes, you have to be optimistic. I am
Thank
optimistic.
you, Mr. Fola Athawari,
Yes.
former CEO, Lagos State Security Trust Fund. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And we'd like to thank you, Major General Chris Musa, Theatre Commander, Joint Task Force Northeast Operation Hadinkai. Thank you so much, and thanks also for your service to the nation. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, and Happy New Year in advance.
Happy New Year to you as well. 2022 in retrospect continues. We'll be going to another equally important issue. Stay with us.
At about midday, President Muhammadu Buhari arrives the council chamber after a two-day official trip to Nasarawa State to append his signature on the reworked Electoral Act Amendment Bill, which is the first in 12 years after the 2010 Electoral Act. The President of the Senate, Mr. Ahmed Lawan, Speaker of the House of Representatives, Mr. Femi Gbajabiamila, Chairman of the Nigeria Governors Forum, Governor Kayode Fayemi of Ekiti State, the Chairman of the Inter-Party Advisory Council, Mr. Yabagi Sani, as well as other members of Cabinet were in attendance.
Chairman, Independent National Electoral Commission.
The President acknowledges an improved version of the bill, which he has held for the past 25 days since it was transmitted on January 31, 2022. However, he has some areas of concern.
No political appointee at any level shall be voting delegate or be voted for at the convention or congress of any political party for the purpose of the nomination of candidates for any election. This provision has introduced qualification and disqualification criteria that alter various the Constitution by way of imposing blanket restriction and disqualification to serving political office holders, of which they are constitutionally accorded protection.
That provision is a major objection raised by the President, which he believes infringes on the rights of political office holders. He wants the National Assembly to amend the section.
I hereby assent to the bill and request the National Assembly to consider immediate amendments that will bring the bill in tune with constitutionality by way of deleting section 84, subsection 12 accordingly.
Appearing visibly elated, the President, flanked by the leadership of the National Assembly, finally appends his signature to the reworked 2021 Electoral Act Amendment Bill. Moments after the brief ceremony, the President of the Senate, as well as the Speaker of the House of Representatives, apparently went into a private meeting with the President in his office. Now that the reworked 2021 Electoral Act Amendment Bill has been signed, expectations have obviously soared, and a more reliable election conduct in the country is imminent. From the Presidential Villa, Gloria Umezuke, Channels Television News.
Welcome back. You're watching 2022 in retrospect, the highlight of some of the events and activities that shaped the year 2022, which will, in a few hours, will turn to 2023. I do have a lineup of guests here with me in the studios to weigh in on what you've just seen and more, as it has to do with the Electoral Act, part of that judiciary as well. On my immediate right, Mr. Jibrin, immediate left, I beg your pardon, is a senior advocate of Nigeria. He's also a member, former member, body of benchers, Thank you for coming on this morning, sir.
Thank you,
this evening. Sitting right beside him, a man you know as well, Mr. Festus Okoye, National Commissioner and Chairman, Information and Voter Education Committee of INEC. Thank you for coming on as well, Mr. Okoye.
Thank you so much.
And then NAOB Convener of Nigeria Civil Society Situation Room. Thank you for coming on, madam.
Thank you for having me.
And Samson Itodo, Executive Director, Yaga Africa. Samson, good to see you.
Always a delight. Thank you.
Well, 2022, just a few more hours, it will be 23, and then there will be a lot more focus on what will happen with the elections. But let me start off with that report, which we just played about the Electoral, February, a date in history, a month in history in the life of this country. So I'll just get your views one after the other, but starting with you, Mr. Kutakwa, this signing of the Electoral Act into law, yes, it does change a lot of things, but for you, looking at the implication of that act, what do you think?
Well, thank you. For me, I have always held the view that our problem is not with the law. Our problem, basically, is with us. It's our attitude, as politicians, as lawyers, as judges, as INEC, whatever name you call us. You will not bring any angel from heaven to conduct our election, or are we going to import angel from heaven as politicians in Nigeria? There's nothing in the old Electoral Act, for instance, that says that a politician should engage thugs for purposes of election. Indeed, all the laws that we have had, including the one that deals with parties primaries, have emphasized democratic principles of voting. But when you look at the kind of political parties we have in Nigeria, I ask myself, do we really have political parties in the strict sense of the word that engages in political education, political sensitization, that believe ideally in the democratic principles of one man, one vote, that respects sovereignty of the people? So the practical reality on the ground, notwithstanding that what we see and the law that we have signed, is that our attitude and character and our orientation towards democratic principle in Nigeria seems to be on a very serious deficiency. And until we look at that critically, the new Electoral Act has introduced a lot of innovations, which, if we allow it to work, it will work. But if we don't allow it to work, no matter how beautiful the provisions of laws are, they are being implemented by human beings. And those human beings are Nigerians that appears to have a DNA within their blood that seems to suggest that violating the law with impunity has become the order of the day, because there are no consequences for these infractions of our law. But having said that, I commend the new Electoral Act that introduced a lot of innovation. For instance, electronic transmission of results. There again, do we have the facilities for INEC to transmit electronically, given our very highly deficient power supply, our epileptic internet services, and so on and so forth? I'm sure my learned friend and the Honorable Commissioner sitting immediately at my left will be able to throw more light as to the capacity of INEC. I do not want to go to what other thing operating in my mind.
Yeah, but we'll probably, hopefully soon, but he might as well just pick it up from there. Mr. Okoye, could you go ahead, please?
Well, I think that the signing of the Electoral Act into law is historic. And the Electoral Act 2022 is a very progressive piece of legislation. It has domiciled more concretely some of the provisions the Commission has been canvassing for in our electoral legal framework. And it has also changed the electoral matrix of this country. For instance, this is the first time that a law is making a provision that funds due to the Commission for the conduct of election should be released to the Commission at least 360 days before the conduct of any election. Secondly, we have had very serious challenges with the issue of voter accreditation and authentication. The new Electoral Act has also domiciled more concretely the use of the smart card reader or any other electronic device for the authentication and validation of voters. The third is that the new Electoral Act has also made it possible for only the Federal High Court to have exclusive and original jurisdiction over pre-election matters. Prior to this particular period, the various high courts and the High Court of the Federal Capital Territory exercise jurisdiction over pre-election matters. But now we only have the Federal High Court dealing with the issue of pre-election litigation. And so I think that there are new innovations and new issues in the electoral legal framework that will definitely change the way elections are conducted and also the way our political parties are organized. If you recall, the president signed the new Electoral Act into law on the 25th day of February 2022, and then the next day, being the 26th day of February 2022, the Commission released the timetable and schedule of activities for the conduct of the 2023 general election. So I think that I agree with the learned senior advocate that law and law alone does not make a good election. It is a combination of a good electoral legal framework and also good organization and planning that will make for a successful election. But we believe that with this new law, it has given us a lot of muscle, given us a power to do the right thing, and also giving the political parties the marching order that in terms of the party organization, in terms of the conduct of party primaries and also nomination of candidates, that they also have a responsibility to do things in a transparent manner that will befit political parties that want to assume power. And so we as a commission, we are happy with the new electoral legal framework, and it will give us a lot of leeway and a lot of window to operationalize some of the things we have in store for the election.
I know it's part of what the CSOs have been advocating for a while. So, Mr. B, could you just tell us, from what you've seen, what kind of impact is this act having already?
I think for us, from the side of civil society, the signing of the Electoral Act, into law, signing of the bill into law, that was a date with history, because we advocated for it. It has been so many years. I think that was the 7th time that the bill went to the president. When it went for the 6th time, we were holding up ourselves, towards the end of the year of last year. We were holding ourselves, we were hoping that that was going to be a gift for the end of the year. But again, the president turned it down. They went and did adjustment. We followed up, and, we were given extra duties or extra work, to work hard. But we were excited when the parliament came back and they went into action immediately, and they were able to turn the bill to the president. And so that day was a date with history. I think it's because we know that there were flaws, because these days you are seeing more pronouncements for victory, in terms of elections from the courts instead of INEC. We want more victories coming from the side of INEC. INEC is the one that has the right to declare people winners or losers and all that if election is conducted under a free, fair, atmosphere, and is also credible. We want more announcements. And that's why we also advocated for the commission, for the Electoral Offences Tribunal, or the commission. The bill is before the House, and if we had a backup, right now, I think INEC has about 800 cases, which they are going to talk about. It has
increased from 600 to 800 now.
So when we are looking at all of that, you see this law as a win-win, because now, no longer power has gone to the hands of the people. And that's why when you see the aspect of, things that they need to tidy up is in the area of vote buying and vote selling and so on and so forth. But when you are looking at that as well, you now know that once voting has been concluded, then it is uploaded. You can see that technology has come to stay. And then accreditation, it will accredit, it will do all the things that it needs to do, and interference will be seen. There's no way you can interfere with the system and it will not be seen. And so I think it's exciting for us, civil society organizations, that now the votes of Nigerians will count. And now people need to be able to defend their vote. When you want to go and cast your vote, you know that you have a duty. But all of it will be dependent on citizens, the civil society. And that includes you and I, the media. The judiciary has a huge duty. And I think we need to really bring in the MBA in terms of how pronouncements are being done in the courts, for example. We have a duty to correct things in Nigeria. Well, if the law has been given, it needs to be implemented.
We'll get Mr. Kutekwa to speak about that, hopefully, as we progress. But Mr. Todo, is there any such thing you can describe as a big takeaway for this Electoral Act this year?
First, if you look at the form for which the law came to be, it's victory for citizens and victory for democracy. Yes, fantastic piece of legislation, but it didn't come easy. It took the effort of different stakeholders, and in particular citizens. There were 2 or 3 defining moments in the entire process of making this law. The first one was after the committee had concluded its work, we were told that some provisions were deleted and there were insertions that were made in the bill. It took public outcry, to get issues like electoral technology protected in the law. And when that happens, for citizens who are losing faith in democracy and the electoral process, I think that should inspire the citizen out there, that indeed you can speak and the state and government will listen and deliver a legislation that reflects your needs and your priorities. That's one. The second is, if you look at how, yes, the National Assembly prioritized this issue, but the big issue is when you look at the public hearings and the issues that citizens canvass, you could also see that, yes, the National Assembly was responsive, in highlighting those issues. And so when you talk about takeaway, in terms of the entire process, the fact that citizens watched over this process, they engaged, the fact that the National Assembly adopted a collaborative approach, because there was a technical committee comprised of the Minister of Justice, the Office of the Attorney General, INEC was the National Commissioner was part of that committee and also even led some aspects of that committee. You could also see legislators, and that joint approach adopted by both the Senate and the House helped fast track, and it helped build consensus around those issues. And so when you talk about takeaway, the form and the process for this is a key one, that this entire Electoral Act came as a result of intense public engagement, and that should inspire citizens. The second is the issues, in the Act. I'll deviate from electronic transmission, but let's look at one of those issues that was reportedly deleted from the report. And that is the power that INEC should have to review declarations made under duress or in contravention of the guidelines. Because previously, INEC didn't have that power. But now, INEC has the power. So what happened in the 2019 elections where politicians force, returning officers, coalition officers to declare them, winners under duress, gives INEC the power to review the results. The other part of the Electoral Act was the attempt by the National Assembly to fix local government elections. So if you look at Part 5 or 6 of the Electoral Act, based on that provision, it provides, I think Section 150 or so, that all local government elections across the country shall be guided by the part of the Electoral Act that deals with the procedure for the conduct and the management of the FCT election. And I think that's quite an innovative way of trying to sanitize our local government election. And if you see that the court, some states attempted, to circumvent and ignore the law, but they were forced by the court to suspend the conduct of local government elections. And the point about securing INEC's funding, that we've been screaming and citizens have been asking that one way to rig election is to starve INEC of its funding. And the law now provides that 360 days, to elections, INEC should have all the funding for the elections. Again, the implementation of this, like previous speakers have said, is quite critical. But this is one piece of legislation that citizens should celebrate as victory for democracy.
Ms. Okoye, I know that Mr. Kutekwa did speak about capacity of INEC. to carry out some of this election, the laws notwithstanding. But then there's also a lot that is expected of INEC from the people. In fact, a lot of people got to register this time because of introduction of BVAS, no thanks to the law. They're still so optimistic, hoping that this time there will be a lot of difference. So in addition to probably you responding to that question from Mr. Kutekwa, what should they expect from INEC? Probably, I know you're making plans about logistics. Used to be a challenge, hoping this time they will all start at the same time. Nobody will arrive late. People expect to pick up their PVCs so they can go ahead and participate this time. Unique candidates across board. What should they expect from INEC?
Well, the people of this country should expect that this commission will conduct a very good election. Conducting a very good election in terms of the fact that we started preparations for the conduct of the 2023 general election. Immediately, we finished with the 2019 general election. We did what we call both internal and external review of the election and made a determination relating to certain things. First, we asked the question, what are those things we did so well that we don't need to change anything? Then we also asked the second question, what are those things we did well, but we didn't do so well that we need to improve upon and upgrade? And then we asked the question, what are those things we did so badly that we have to completely throw away and begin afresh? That was the premise on which we base our processes and our procedures. As of today...
The number 3 rank highest.
Well, as of today, our processes and procedures are going as planned. Okay. When we released the timetable and schedule of activities on the 26th of February 2022, we listed 14 critical and fundamental items that we need to accomplish. Out of those 14, we've already accomplished 9 and accomplished the 9 on schedule. On the 30th of this month, political parties we are supposed to have submitted the names, signature, and personal particulars of their polling agents in relation to national election. And then thereafter, on the 6th day of January, they are supposed to submit the names, signature, photographs, and personal particulars of their party agents for the state elections. That's the governorship and state assembly elections. Now, on the 12th day of January, we are supposed to release the official register of voters. All these things we are going to accomplish, and we are going to accomplish them on schedule. The BVAS, which we said is going to be the game changer in relation to this election, is in place. And I want to confirm that we have sufficient number of BVAS that will be used for the conduct of election in the 176,846 polling units across this country. And we're also going to have redundancies for the 8,809 registration areas or electoral wards. And we also have others that we are using for training because we want to train our ad hoc staff longer on the use of the BVAS so that we won't have a challenge of people not knowing how to use the BVAS and blaming it on technology and so on. So in terms of that, we are good to go. We are also harvesting the names and personal particulars of those who are going to serve as our ad hoc staff. And for the 2 elections, that's the national and the state election, we are going to engage over 1.4 million ad hoc staff. And we are going to also train them. We've also concluded arrangements with the National Union of Road Transport Workers and the National Association of Road Transport Owners, as well as the marine unions, in terms of our logistics and logistic issues. And we are confident that with the processes we have in place, other than the security challenges in different parts of the country, that we are going to deploy on time. And so I believe that in terms of our processes and procedures, we're on top of the situation.
Does it answer your question, sir?
Well, all that my learned friend and the Honorable the National Commissioner has said are plans. Now, first let me appeal to him because INEC is not a natural person. I want to appeal that INEC live up to its name of being independent. Independent National Electoral Commission. Independent from political parties, independent from government, independent from everybody.
Are there signs that concern you at the moment for you to raise that?
Yes, there are. For instance, there are stages of electoral disputes. After the conduct of election, for instance, if INEC is too, INEC has been brought to know that, for instance, election in a particular state was not a product of democratic principle, INEC should thank, and after proper investigation, thank those who brought that to his knowledge and stop using taxpayers' money to fund litigation to defend such election. Because if INEC comes to court and say, yes, election in polling unit A, B, C, and D, according to what Mr. Etodo has said, had been rigged, and they discover it has been rigged, INEC is aware it has been rigged, why should you pay Mr. Kutepa to go and defend the election petition? That's number one, INEC need to do. Number two, my learner friend was commending that you have had now a centralized litigation in Federal High Court. I didn't see that as a huru, because for me, it's just because we have not tested it. There are provisions of the Electoral Act that concentrate litigations, pre-election litigation, in the Federal High Court is a violation of Section 272 of the Constitution that gives unlimited jurisdiction to State High Court to settle civil disputes, and pre-election matter comes within the purview of civil disputes. You see, my problem with us is not about the fine laid-down layer of the activities that he has beautifully laid out. For him as a person that I've known, and maybe the chairman of INEC, who may or who have a nationalistic instinct in them to see that things are well done, very well, fine and good. But how nationalistic and patriotic will the over 1-point-something million ad hoc staff to be trained by INEC will be in carrying out the aim and objectives of INEC for free, fair, and credible election? That is an issue that he needs to address, because like I started in the beginning, these 1-point-something million people that have been recruited are Nigerians, drinking Nigerian water and breathing Nigerian air in Nigerian soil. How are we able to put in them the spirit of resisting the temptations of collecting money and change the result, even if you at your national level, where you are monitoring the result of the election, the computer, the beaver, does not monitor itself. There is a theory of law, garbage in, garbage out. How are we sure that somebody somewhere there will not be unpatriotic? So all these are all things that I think we should interrogate as Nigerians. I've been practicing and I've been doing election petition matters for a very long time. In the circumstances where you expect INEC to praise the petitioners, INEC becomes, with respect, they become more Catholic than the Pope. And so it worries some of us that democracy shouldn't end in court. Democracy, like my friend and Ernest said, we want sovereignty of the people to flow by INEC announcing result of election. Because as of today, INEC is not the last referee in election in Nigeria. The last referee appears to be the court. Okay, well, and once the court makes such pronouncement, and then if time permits, our judiciary also need to know that once there is chaos in this country as a result of bad decision, then there is no place for judiciary and lawyers to ply their trades in this country. So we all must agree
we'll still
to
get a
do
lot
what is
more
right.
on that one. I know I've heard a lot about perspectives on the beavers, the backup, in case something happens somewhere, but I guess we'll get a lot more from that. But let me bring in Millicent. Millicent, go ahead, please.
Thanks, Jimmy. I almost thought that you had forgotten I was here for a moment. And welcome to all our guests. My question is, perhaps what I sensed was an exception to the rule when Mr. Okoye was talking about some of the activities and the preparations ahead of next year's general election. And that is a topic we've been discussing before this one, the issue of security. And perhaps I should ask this to Madam Enobi as a CSO and perhaps Mr. Etodo, in terms of the attacks on INEC, the many attacks from 2019, over 50, to 2022, and then we just have barely 2 months to a general election. Do you think that it is safe and, you know, there is no security threat for us to have this election, which begins in February?
I do think that the issue of security threat is something that worries one, no doubt about it. We do believe that, we do know that the issue of security threats, you know, the attack on INEC offices is something that we have condemned seriously. And that is why we are calling on all Nigerians that this election is not just about INEC. It's about the citizens. We have to understand the fact that the workers in INEC are Nigerians. They are citizens trying to uphold that aspect of the system. And we are part of the system. We are the citizens. We need to change the narrative of using our young people. And when you go to certain quarters, or even when you talk to security people, they say it's the politicians that are the issues, that are the problems for them. Because one party is trying to be stronger, or one candidate is trying to be stronger than the other, and they are using people's children to destroy the system. And that's why it's very, very important that we talk to our children, and we want the young Nigerians to know that many of these politicians that are sending them to destroy do not have their interests at heart. They don't use their children, they don't send their children to go and do all of these things, but sending other people's children. And these are the younger Nigerians that are so vulnerable, and that they are out of job. Many of them don't have jobs, and then you feel. And we are also discussing this, the whole thing. This election is holding in the midst of when you have more than 133 million Nigerians below the poverty line. And so you use them because you have some money, and sometimes the money does not belong to the politicians, because many of them looted the treasury. Many of the governors are not paying, they are not even paying, you know, they have not paid salaries for 8 months, 9 months. They have not paid those who suffered for Nigeria, like those who are under pension right now. Some of them retired for 3, 4, 5 years. They have not collected their pension. And so they become very, very vulnerable. And these are security issues. So perhaps sometimes you find a struggle in a particular state. It's not because of any other thing, but because they are trying to survive. And so those who are responsible are still those who are manipulating the people to be able to do that. And so we are calling on all the stakeholders. We are calling on the citizens. We are calling on the politicians. We are calling on the judges. We're calling on MBA to pull its weight, and the body of bench, you know, the benchers to do their job, and the Ministry of Justice. They are Nigerians. We are calling on all Nigerians to stand upright for Nigeria, that wherever you are. The fact that Nigerians are on their duty posts and they are losing their lives because of election is shame on Nigeria. And it's shame on every one of us, and we are all partakers, and it's a failure of a generation. 2023 is a date with history. It's a date that if every one of us stand up and do our own bits at our own levels, and that's why we call on the security forces. The police is the chief, is the agent that is responsible. But the whole of the armed forces are involved when they are called upon. And we are asking, because as a woman too, bloodletting in Nigeria, we don't have value to life in Nigeria. When you are hearing, like in Kaura, in Kaura, you know, local government in Kaduna, you hear that about 40 people were wiped up in the same day. As a woman, I think of the 40 pregnancies that women carried, how they nursed those babies up to the point that you have wasted their lives. When they talk of the insurgents, the soldiers are children of women. The young people that are going on the streets that have no jobs and that have gone to somewhere else. And the young people are caught in between all of these things, because whether is the insurgent or the conflict that meets the young people, you either join them or they kill you. If the forces meet you, they are also, we need to look at the security is a major issue. And we are asking that the security forces do their duty, that the police, because people were arrested in Ekiti, people were arrested in Osun. We have not seen any process in terms of
and perhaps Mr. Okoye can lend his voice on that matter.
Justice needs to be brought.
Indeed.
They complain about the Electoral Act, but we have the Penal Code, we have the criminal, you know, the laws that control the Constitution of Nigeria that can bring us down to the law. And so we ask that every state and every citizen where you live protect the INEC institutions protect the children of Nigeria, whether they are INEC ad hoc staff or wherever they are, so that you don't waste lives.
Let's talk to Mr. Okoye, and this is with regards to INEC's preparations. There have been about 8 attacks this year alone. Have there been anyone held accountable? I mean, this shows there is a process that is ongoing. And also, when people ask the question of independence of, your institution, from what we heard the senior advocate Kutekpa talk about.
Well, in terms of INEC's preparations and in terms of arrest and investigation and prosecution of electoral offenders, you have to realize that if you look at the Electoral Act only gives the Commission the power to prosecute. The Commission does not have the power of arrest. The Commission does not have the power to investigate. It is only when arrests are made, investigations are carried out, and the file is turned over to the Independent National Electoral Commission that we can prosecute. And that is why the chairman of the Commission has said it consistently that what we need at this point in time is an Electoral Offences Commission and Tribunal that will take charge from the beginning of arrest, investigation, and prosecution of offenders. Because some of the electoral offenders may even be staff of the commission, and we cannot be expected to begin to prosecute ourselves in a court of law. So to that particular extent, we believe that we should pursue an Electoral Offences Commission and Tribunal. On the issue of independence of the commission, the Independent National Electoral Commission is not just the chairman and the 12 national commissioners. We have over 16,000 staff across all the states of the Federation. We have our state offices made up of heads of department. We have our local government offices headed by electoral officers, assistant electoral officers, and so on. So I believe that the commission has been protected by the law. We have the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, 1999, as amended, which gives the Commission the exclusive right and power and authority to organize, undertake, and supervise elections in this country. And we also have the constitutional provision that protects the national commissioners and the chairman from any form of harassment, any form of and so on. And so I believe that independence is not just in the law or in the Constitution. There's also what we call both mental independence and otherwise. So you can be theoretically independent, but mentally you have sold your conscience and you don't want to be independent. I believe that we have the processes and procedures in place that protects the commission. Now, what we have done, and what the chairman has completely emphasized, is that we are building a professional and ethical commission that where a national commissioner cannot even influence the outcome of any election in one polling unit. And that's the direction we are going. And so I believe that it is left for the Nigerian people to make a determination on whether this particular commission has been carrying out its activities independently and professionally and ethically. Okay. And by the way we are going, we believe that we can give Nigerians a very good election and that we can build an institution that all Nigerians will be proud of.
Just a quick one before we go, Samson. I know you've spoken about the role of the citizens for this election. So many will ask, if the Electoral Act has been passed, all these provisions are there, there's BVAS, we will see real-time uploading of results, certain things will happen. Why do they need to still be on the alert on election day?
Well, vigilance is a price that you pay for liberty. These entire elections is managed by human beings. And these human beings, are susceptible to compromise. Because at the end of the day, it boils down to the personal integrity of the individual who is managing the electoral process at your polling unit. But then you have to keep an eye, because a credible election is a joint task and a shared responsibility. So citizens need to keep an eye. Yes, INEC may be independent or is independent, but you have 1.4 million people out there. These are not regular staff of the commission. They are recruited as ad hoc officials. So citizens should, one, show up early at their polling unit on election day, and then when they conclude voting, they should stay in the polling unit and ensure that the polling officials comply with the guidelines for the conduct of that election. And you talk about, beavers. What citizens need to know is that they need to watch to observe that the beavers is used to take the original and authentic result from that polling unit. Because it's their duty and their responsibility, and they shouldn't just vote and go back home thinking that, the process will not be manipulated.
All right. That will be very interesting area where should be a lot of focus as well. But, ladies and gentlemen, we have to go. Mr. Jibril Nokutakwa, a senior advocate of Nigeria. Now looking at him saying, what's happening? We just started. Time is already fast spent. Mr. Festus Okoye, and there will be Samson Etodo. Thank you all for coming in. I wish you all a very, very happy New Year. It will be Mr. Kutakwa's birthday tomorrow, actually. So I wish you all the best.
Thank you very much.
Right.
Happy New Year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy New Year to you all.
Thank you.
We're back in a moment, everyone. Stay with us.
And just as economists had predicted, Nigeria's headline inflation rate climbed higher to a 17-year high, 19.4% in July, up from 18.60% recorded in June. This is according to the latest report released by the National Bureau of Statistics. The figure, which also marks the sixth consecutive monthly rise in inflation, is 2.27% higher on a year-on-year basis than 17.38% recorded in September 2005. A breakdown of the NBS data shows that Nigeria's urban inflation rate rose by 2.08% to 20.09% in July 2022 from 18.01% recorded July the previous year, while the rural inflation rate jumped from 16.75% to 19.22% on a year-on-year comparison. Both indexes were unchanged within the comparative month. Interestingly, the food inflation rate in July declined by 0.01% to 2.04% in month-on-month contrast against the 2.05% rate recorded in June 2022. And this is attributed to a reduction in the prices of basic food items such as garri, yams, maize and vegetables. Similarly, food inflation over the previous 12-month period dropped by average 1.42% to 18.75% from the average annual rate of 20.16% recorded in July 2021. The economic interpretation of the rising inflation number means that Nigerians are not able to purchase as much goods and services with their monies, as the value of their income has been eroded due to rising costs. Welcome back. Major events that shaped the year 2022. And from January, it really was a debate on fuel subsidy. And through the year, that sector has witnessed a lot, from the threat of subsidy removal to the alleged importation of bad fuel, if you remember, to scarcity, whether due to flooding or not. And let's not forget the discovery of crude oil theft in Nigeria. According to the federal government, Nigeria is losing $3.27 billion crude to thieves in 14 months. Well, the same multidimensional poverty index, that is the MPI, this also stared us in the face. And, well, to talk more about this, and this is talking about the economy, joining us here in Lagos is the Deputy President, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Mr. Gabriel Idahosa. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
We also have joining us from Abuja studio with Chamberlain there, an economist who's also a public policy scholar, Dr. Tokpe Fasua. Welcome to the program. And joining us via Zoom in London is a professor of economics with the University of Ibadan and visiting professor at the London School of Economics and Political Science in the United Kingdom, Professor Olawale Ogunkola. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, so I'll begin with my guest here in Lagos. Your take on how the economy fared in 2022?
Well, we will not say it was as expected. It was far below what we expected, both in terms of the macro numbers, in terms of the growth for the year. We're hoping to get something like 3%, 4%, but we didn't get there. And then we had, in terms of sectors, a lot of sectors did not really do as much as we expected. But some sectors did extremely well. If you look at the ICT, for example, we did pretty well there, and it continues to grow. So it sort of compensated for some sectors that are not doing so well. Then, of course, agriculture was flat because even though there was a lot of input in agriculture, the combination of security and the flood wiped out a lot of the expectations in that sector. And then you find that in between that, manufacturing continued to suffer because of the two key issues that they always had. There was power, there is infrastructure, and then the cost of raw materials because of imported inflation. The exchange rates kept spiraling out of any kind of control that CBN tried to put in place. And then you had the Ukraine-Russia war that came early in the year and throughout all the projections of exchange rates. So on the whole, not as much as one would expect.
You mentioned Russia, Ukraine. Let's go to Professor Gunkola, and this is your thoughts from that international outlook of how you think Nigeria's economy fared with all of the external impact.
Honestly, I can hear you clearly. Can you hear me?
We can hear you clearly. Just your thoughts on the impact from the international scene, how that impacted Nigeria's economy in 2022.
Okay. Thank you very much. There are many factors. We are an open economy. And when we say open, it implies that we do a lot of trade and we do so many things with international community. The first one has to do with the price of crude oil. Of course, you know the Ukrainian and Russian war, which is still on. But surprisingly for Nigeria, we are the only country, exporting oil country, that did not have substantial increase in the value of our oil. Again, the reason you know very well, it has to do with leakages in the production. So many barrels we're supposed to export, but we are unable because we do some sharp practices that reduce the amount of oil that is sold at international market. Again, we are part of the global system. You can see the effect of inflation. Though not only imported inflation, we have some other reasons why the inflation is so high, including the internal problems that we have in terms of production destruction because of insecurity. And in fact, we also imported some inflation, given that we are producing crude oil, but importing crude oil. So instead of the increase in price of the oil to be beneficial to us, it's more like a cost because we need to do more in terms of blocking the leakages. Of course, the issue of the controversial fuel subsidy, which implies that the higher the oil price, the more the subsidy we pay. Also, ameliorated the positive impact we're supposed to have from some of these external development. The issue of food production, of course, you know the disruption we have, and importing food is also an expensive business. So instead of us being able to produce what we can consume, we are importing more of what we are not producing. So this created a lot of problem that we have currently in the economy.
Let's talk to Dr. Fasua in Abuja, and this is your thoughts on the policymakers. To them, fiscal, monetary, they put in place the best policies for the economy in 2022. What's your take?
Yeah, thank you very much. Now, I think I'll just piggyback on what the professor from University of Ibadan has said. It is true that in 2022, we had quite a bit of losses in the agricultural sector, especially with the floods. You know, this year was perhaps the worst in a decade, and that came with a lot of losses. But also to mitigate that, I think that the government of the day has made quite a bit of investment in agriculture, some of which may not be immediately reaped, as it were. And then, of course, the thing is also that sometimes it plays out like that, So there's been quite a bit of investment in agriculture. When we talk about some of the policies that try to reduce the importation of food crops, especially maybe when you talk about import substitution as a policy. Sometimes it's going to be medium to long term. For example, the production of rice, investment in rice, a lot of that will go to waste, but at least the kind of mentality is changing. And of course, the crude oil sector too has kind of recovered because at some point in September, we were producing less than 1 million barrels a day. But now, as at the end of November, we were back to being the largest producing in Africa. So we're now over 1 million and all of that. I'm very positive that in spite of all the challenges that we seem to have crossed the Rubicon positively in Nigeria in terms of the economy.
But if you look at some of those figures from, for instance, the National Bureau of Statistics, they published their figure and they indicate here that the inflation rate rose for the 10th consecutive month in November.
Absolutely.
And then if you look at that, that's 21.47%.
Yes.
And that rose from 21.09% of what was recorded last year, November, about this time. And so that gives you roughly 6.7% higher than what we recorded the last time out.
Yes.
And so if you say you cross the Rubicon.
So we've crossed the Rubicon. Because the thing about the inflation is that in economics, there's what we call the lag effect. Because sometimes it takes a while for policies to kick in. I think what many people may not get right regarding the inflation is that we are kind of underestimating the effect of COVID. COVID has a very long lag effect, future lead effect, if you like, because into the future, what they call lead effect. So COVID, the reanalysis of what a once in a lifetime, if you like, global shutdown, because if you look at 1918 to 1920, when they had the Spanish flu, they didn't have to shut down the world. But in 2020, when the world was now fully integrated, we now have a super globalized economies, we had to go to sleep, even if it was 6 months. In places like the UK, they're still suffering it. I mean, I was there recently. The manning levels in different shops was dismal. Service delivery has gone to pieces and all of that. And of course, so in a place like Nigeria, it's going to take a while to come. Now, as one of the professors said, so what we're seeing now is a supply side kind of inflation. Manufacturers are having to come back into production, but to a large extent, sourcing materials, raw materials, and otherwise, including human resources, to get back on track is a lot more expensive. They have to put that back into the cost of their goods, which the final consumer must buy. That's the inflation you're seeing. Of course, in Europe, in America, they're seeing 50-year high inflation. So ours is about 20 years high inflation, as it is. But in no time, I believe, in maybe a quarter or two, we start to see a kind of plateauing and a depression of that inflation level. Of course, the Monetary Policy Committee keeps increasing the benchmark rate, the MPR.
Isn't that going to have its own effect?
Well, the idea is that, they also can't sit on their hands and think that, okay, the inflation is going to go away. So they want to try and see. And there's supposed to be a negative, relationship between interest rate levels and inflation, as it were. It hasn't started to have that. It started to have the effect for now. But in time, that those actions, as well as other tapering, if you like, actions in other sectors of the economy, will lead to a plateauing of that inflation.
Let me understand your point. I mean, we've seen even oil prices, gas prices, pardon me, in the state, it came back down after it went high for a while. Are you saying, for instance, food inflation, petrol prices that we see here, are they going to level up and come down? Is that what it's just?
Well, okay. What we'll see around petrol will be what will be the effect of maybe a Dangote petroleum refining company coming into play, as well as other, modular refineries like Walter Smith, Owerri and Co. If we're able to get the security going, and I think luckily for us, we're seeing a kind of lull in all of these security challenges around the country. Now, so that if a Dangote refinery comes into play and we don't have to import petroleum refined anymore, that would lead to some accretion in our reserves, some more interest from foreign direct investors, some more stability in the value of the Naira. And therefore, if you have stability in the value of the Naira, coupled with these import substitution policies, then we would have less imported inflation. Okay, so the inflation that comes with having to import petroleum, which is the second largest importation that we do in Nigeria, second only to technology. The biggest importation we do every year in this country is technology. Talk about your computers, your everything, your computers, your phones, your TVs, different kind of equipment. Perhaps if you add even the software that we need for running many of our industries, that's the biggest import we do every year. The second is petroleum products. So imagine if that would leave, the quantum of funding that we need to do in terms of, that will have reverberating effect on the economy. And that's why I said, I think that we're about to turn the Rubicon in terms of that. So in terms of food inflation, the flooding for this 2022 was a major factor, apart from the fact that even during COVID, farmers could not even go to farm. And when they went to farm, when they brought their product, to them, there was no market open for them to even sell. So we had a lot of wastage in terms of in 2020 into 2021. But you notice that Nigeria was one of the first countries that pulled out of that global recession at that point in time. So our recovery rate, because we're not so, we're not so tied per se to the global economy as maybe other countries in Europe and America, but our recovery rate was large because of the informal economy. Of course, the IT economy seems to be the fastest growing, but I think that we're not giving enough, enough kudos to the informal economy that actually drives this country. Those resilient farmers, those resilient people who go to the market, those traders and co. They're the people that ensure that, look, they weren't going to take no for an answer. Before you knew it, they were back in play.
And that informal economy is a huge component of the economy in this country. I wonder if Mr. Dahoste shares the same optimism about, for instance, food inflation, the transport cost. Should we be optimistic that perhaps moving forward, it will level up, as Mr. Fashua believes?
Well, as I said, if you look at the SME sector in Nigeria, during COVID, after COVID, they were clearly the first to recover, and they recovered very quickly. It's just demonstrated the resilience that has always been there. Sometimes it's a surprise to us Nigerians ourselves how we can quickly bounce back. And that is what has driven the recovery that we saw after COVID. Most small businesses that were held at home got up and found something to do because they just had to take care of themselves. So that translated into a lot of new businesses, a lot of innovations around what people were doing before. A lot of people shifted a little bit. If you were in entertainment or event center, you look for something else to do quickly. A lot of people went into food packaging, into processing, which they were not doing before. So that has continued to help us, and it will still be there. And that is what is actually sustaining the level of agriculture that we are seeing. So in spite of insecurity in general farmlands, we still manage to have our farmers go to do farming close to home. A lot of farmers now say, well, they can't go very far from home, but they still have to go to farms and do maybe a smaller size of farms and still produce something. And that is why also we haven't seen the level of scarcity of food that was feared, especially from COVID to the floods. That the food is still there. It's much more expensive, but the fact is that it is there. You go to the market, you still find the food, but it's much more expensive. So that resilience will continue to take us. But how fast we can completely recover is in doubt in terms of timing. Perhaps the first half of 2023, we will just about be climbing out of the worst situation we have this year. But the timing as to when some of those key events mentioned by Mr. Faswa will happen, for example, we have about 4 or 5 refineries, not just the big one. There are several refineries being rehabilitated around the country. There are small, medium-sized refineries that are almost completed. We start production in first or second quarter 2023. So as all these refineries start running and we start to reduce the importation, we begin to see some changes in the level of imported inflation. And once we can reduce imported inflation, which is pretty much about half, if not 3/4 of all inflation we are suffering. If we can reduce that is related to importing refined petroleum products, we will see a recovery that perhaps in the second half of 2023 will be much faster than what we are seeing now. So that is the hope, that some of these things happen, the refineries start working, we manage to get the farmland secure enough for farmers to venture out further, expand the size of the farms they are running, and be able to produce a lot more food and reduce the inflation that is directly related to the reduction in food production that we saw in this quarter and the last quarter.
About the optimism production of the modular refineries, the refineries working together, and the positives to come in 2023, the first quarter. But this brings to mind the issue of crude oil theft. Have we handled that? And let me ask. I'd like to ask Professor Ogunkola, and this is for you to give us kind of like your outlook of what you're seeing happening. I mean, the discoveries this year alone of crude oil theft, and if you think we have the capacity and the will to tackle that.
Well, I can hear you clearly, but if it is on crude oil theft, I think we need to do more in terms of security. We are focusing on crude oil theft because it's affecting us directly. There are many leakages in that system, and people are benefiting from weak regulatory system and enforcement. Stealing crude oil is not a small businessman that we do that. It is also people that know how these things work. So look at even the mineral resources. From information and from study that we have, some people are living large on this. So it's a whole system. Some people believe that it belongs to them and they should do whatever they want to do with this. That's one aspect of what we need to do. And I hope by the time we have new government, we have new strategies of blocking oil theft, especially, and also to look at all what belongs to Commonwealth in terms of how do we secure them and how do we ensure that once it gets to federation, it will also trickle down to those communities to address the problems that they have. You will remember there was a time when we used to have insecurity issues like kidnapping in the Niger Delta. My take is that they moved from that kind of nefarious activities to oil theft. It's like a kind of substitute. The question is, what can we do to address and be sure that we all believe that it is a commonwealth, that you go to the common purse, and that everybody will be fairly treated in that common purse. We also learned that mineral resources like gold and others are being cornered by some people, whether it's true or not. Those are the question of national question. Do we really believe in one entity? Is it the revenue sharing formula that's the issue that we need to address so that everybody will bring all the things to the center for us to share in the common purse? On the issue of inflation that was discussed earlier on, let me just say one or two things. There are many factors. You can talk about demand factor, you can talk about supply factor and so on. But to me, we need to do more in terms of coordination of policies, both monetary and fiscal policies. The coordination in terms of when CBN is trying to control inflation, the fiscal behavior is not moving in the same direction. As a country, we can do better, and we need to have coordination mechanism in place so that one party will not be doing the other party will be doing something that is contrary or negating the effect of what the other is doing.
Let me come to you, Mr. Idahosa, and that's flowing from the question of crude oil theft and the will, and also perhaps your thoughts in terms of the businessman or woman in Lagos, what it is they want, the kind of economy they want so that their businesses can thrive.
Well, just starting from the crude oil theft, where we are now is we are now doing about 1.5 million barrels per day, up from 1.1, at some point it was 1 million, and it was because of a head-on fight with the operators of the fuel theft industry. It's an industry, but the government had to fight that industry and has been able to push back fuel theft maybe 50%. We need to get to about 1.9 to 2 million barrels a day to say we have really dealt with fuel theft. That's how the fuel theft situation is now and how much work needs to be done. In terms of the business, okay, Lagos, if we are saying Lagos and the business community in Lagos, essentially they are looking for a system that takes care of what the government can take care of. We are not expecting that government can do everything, but we are expecting that there are certain things that government can do. For example, government should be able to allow consistent flow of petroleum products. Whatever the price, if you want to subsidize or you don't want to subsidize, it should continue to flow. And government should be able to provide a city or a state where mobility is reasonable. In other words, if you don't have to spend 3-4 hours in traffic to get to where you are going, and you should spend 1 hour at the most, and you're spending 3 hours, the business community feels that that is not beyond the government to deal with. There are certain basic things that the government can do now. But going forward, we expect that it is a legitimate aspiration to expect to have consistent, uninterrupted power supply in Lagos. The reason is that the economy of Lagos by itself is capable of sustaining uninterrupted power supply at a price that it can easily afford, because most of the business in Lagos now is depending on self-generation. And it's clear to us as a business community that if we can have uninterrupted power supply, and we even have to pay 2 or 3 times what we are paying now, the business community will be very happy with that. So there are certain basic things that we think should be done, can be done, and we really think we should continue to engage with the stakeholders, not just government, but other stakeholders, to see that we address these things. We are not expecting as a business community that all the problems of the community will be resolved. water, for example. We are not, a lot of people are not saying, give us water running in our homes. But let's address those key things. Let's have power, let's have mobility that is sensible and efficient for doing business. And it is possible, the government and the business community working to achieve it, without waiting for the whole of Nigeria to resolve our power problems, because that's a long shot. It's going to take a while. But for the business community in Lagos, we believe that the community and the government in Lagos can make these key objectives to be attained.
Dr. Fashua, on Mr. Dahosa's first point, access to, fuel, petrol, and other materials, do you think that the question of fuel subsidy is a question that we must sit down and talk about, removing fuel subsidy?
Yeah, absolutely. And you can see that even the gentlemen that are angling to take over government come 2023 are already addressing that headlong. And I think most of them are promising to do the needful to remove the fuel subsidy, as it were. This is a question that must be addressed for several reasons. For the fact that there's so much magic involved. The last time I did an analysis of fuel consumption in Niger, Cameroon, Chad, and Republic of Benin, I realized that all these countries which are our neighbors all put together, they don't consume as much as a quarter of what Nigeria consumes. You'll be shocked that Chad only uses about 2,500 barrels a day, where Nigeria consumes about 450,000 or thereabouts. Cameroon is somewhere around 58,000. Niger is in the 25,000. Republic of Benin is about 28,000. So add all of those together, you may not be able to get to maybe just over 100,000 barrels consumed in all of these places. And so when they say that, what comes into Nigeria, that most of it get diverted, except you're saying that these fuel that gets imported into Nigeria go as far as Republic of Congo, go as far as Sudan, go as far as Mauritania, and co. So there's a lot of magic, a lot of fraud going on in that sector. Because again, we've not been able to tell exactly how much, liters per day we even consume. Is it 45 million? Is it 60 million? Is it 66 million? And sometime in June 2019, we got 90 million barrels. 90 million liters of consumption. So there's a lot of fraud, meaning that we need to get out of that space where we're being ripped off by just a few people. However, I've been warning about something. If people remember that in 2015, when President Buhari came in for the first time, he actually did remove the subsidy. And that was when petroleum prices went from 87 to 145. It was meant to be a first and full and final removal of petroleum subsidy. But what undid it? What undid that very process was that we went and devalued the currency. So whereas at 145 Naira per barrel, per liter rather, when Naira was doing 199, 197 officially, okay, to the dollar, that was about 80 cents. And 80 cents multiplied by 4, $3.20. In most places in the United States, they were buying, petroleum at about $3 per barrel, which was commensurate. But the moment we devalued by almost half, when Naira went to 360 to the dollar, that means that the 145 Naira per liter at which we were buying suddenly went back to 40 cents. And 40 cents multiplied by 4, that's about $1.60. Well, then the question became, how can we be buying our own fuel at $1.60 per gallon when they were buying at $3, $4 in the United States and so on? And so what happened next, Chamberlain, was that the NNPC started accruing what they called under recovery, because they couldn't come to the public to say, sorry, there was another subsidy developing. And people were asking them then, look, are you sure there's no subsidy? Well, there's no subsidy, but there's under recovery. What they meant by that was that they weren't recovering the total amount that they were using to bring in the crude. So if Nigeria is going to remove the subsidy, you must put a hold. It's become what they call a dilemma. Call it a trilemma, and that's what you keep managing in economics. It's become something that if you take one, you have to lose the other. So we must find ways of ensuring that not only does the Naira remain stable into the medium term, okay, but even if we can improve the value of the Naira so that if you are removing the subsidy, for example, imagine that if the price of petrol would suddenly become 300 or 350 to the liter, all right? You know what I'm saying? If it would suddenly become that, you know, apart from the effect, the inflationary effect on other sectors of the economy, you know, by the time if you then devalue again, that brings in another set of inflation for people to grapple with. So we need to be extremely careful about that.
It appears to feed into what Professor Ogunkola talked about, also ensuring that the monetary and fiscal policies pull in the same direction. That when that happens, you'll get a lot more results and probably clarity in terms of what happens. But about this fuel subsidy, whether or not it should be removed, because many of them keep promising that they will do so. Do you, from what you've seen, because there are those who think that this year, what they've seen this year is that the checks and balances in the oil and gas sector doesn't just seem to hold forth. They think if we were to remove the fuel subsidy as things presently stand, because look at the diesel sector,
exactly,
regulated.
920.
Look at what's going on. So if we, quote unquote, remove the fuel subsidy, can the economy hold?
Well, you know, I mean, okay, the issue then becomes, do we want to remove it in one fell swoop? Or does the government, the incoming government, because look, it's a very touchy subject, and I'd written an article before. I said, I'm not sure any government can dare it. But it's something that needs to go because of all of the befuddlements around you know, what exactly is going on, who is doing what, and all of that, you know, stuff. Yeah, so it's going to be cataclysmic, if you ask me, in terms of the amount of inflation, because, I mean, we're already living in an economy where if government increases the price of fuel by 20%, the cost of transportation goes up by 50%, as if fuel was the only input in driving a bus. You know, there's nothing else to spend on, you know. So it's something that needs to be, there has to be a big meeting called, a huge stakeholder meeting. You have to do some moral suasion around, you know, the prices of goods and services that people, and also you probably want to look at, okay, can we take out 50% of it in the meantime? However, what I'm saying, the moment you do whatever you want to do, if you also devalue, we'll be back to square zero. And at the end of the day, you would have imported a huge amount of inflation because, again, you know, especially even the Dangote refinery we're talking about, they're still going to have to buy the crude at international prices anyway. And if they're having to source dollar for that, if there was something that they could do to ensure that Dangote was paying maybe a Naira equivalent for whatever it was going to get from Nigerian crude, maybe it will help, but a lot of things need to be put in place. Otherwise, as you suggested, it's going to be cataclysmic.
Let me bring in Professor Ogunkola on this matter concerning the debate about fuel subsidy, to be or not to be. Now, several other people have suggested, as part of measures to ensure that there's sanity in the oil and gas sector, first and foremost, ensure that the local transactions in that sector be done in Naira and not in dollars. So, I mean, we've heard Mr. Fashua's suggestions as to how we should proceed with the fuel subsidy subject matter. What will your recommendations be on whether or not we should outrightly remove it or not, or what exactly?
Thank you very much, Chamberlain. It's interesting. Personally, I hate subsidizing consumption. It's not a good way to develop an economy. If you must subsidize the production and give people's choice to either consume or not to consume. Dr. Fashuya has mentioned important points, and they are very important. But the point is that we don't know up to today how much we are consuming in the country. We've done a study, for example, Benin Republic importing more rice than Nigeria. Can you imagine that? So policy management is very critical. So I will advocate for removing subsidy on fuel. However, we should manage the process in such a way that production that is going into this can also benefit from this so that they can produce more for us to consume. And I will decide whether I want to own 5 cars or I want to go by public transport. Not whether I am consuming fuel or not, you are taking the money from me directly or indirectly, because subsidy, whatever money you are using is for all of us. So the management of policy is what we need to get right. And if we get that right, and we can put part of whatever is to move into production, who says we should not export fuel to these other countries? So I agree that it should be removed, but let's look at the strategy that will help us not to create more problem in terms of inflation that you are talking about, or for people to resist and possibly reverse this. The issue is also when you are looking at fuel subsidy. Why do we want to remove this fuel subsidy? It's now because we are paying more on fuel subsidy than even sponsoring education and so on. The issue of governance, cost of governance, I think is what we need to face squarely. Because if you put it also by the side in terms of expenditure, then you need to do analysis. Do we really need this much to be able to run the country? Look at our capital expenditure, for example. We need to separate development-oriented capital expenditure from buying cars, servicing aeroplane and all whatnot. Some of these things we should cut down and face reality. If we don't, it's a matter of time. If you don't remove fuel subsidy, for example, I can't see us going ahead in terms of fiscal balance anymore. It's just so huge. And as I mentioned earlier on, if there is an increase in crude oil today, the price of crude oil today, the subsidy, the amount of subsidy will increase. What's supposed to be benefits to us is a cost now. So we should deal with this issue once and for all. What are the stories about the refineries? I hope, Chamberlain, you can update us on this, because there was a time they wanted to use some $1 billion or so to refurbish them. What is the story?
Yeah. All right, Mr. Dahausa, in Lagos, pardon me, Prof. Mr. Dahausa, could you talk to us briefly about this Naira redesign? Yes, it's in 2022, but it will spill over to next year. And as a matter of fact, the National Assembly are still debating this matter. We don't know what perspectives, how it will turn out eventually on the part of the CBN. Now, the World Bank they are of the opinion that timing, short transition will impact negatively on economic activities. What do you think, and how should this be approached, this Naira redesign policy?
Well, thank you. When the government announced the redesign, the business community, including the Lagos Chamber, made some comments regarding the timing and the question of contingency arrangements for foreseeable disruptions in the economy that can result from the very short period given for the process to be completed. So if the government says, the CBN says it is still this same period, but for certain foreseeable disruptions, for example, the people in the POS agent payment system who require cash as their essential fuel, the fuel of the POS business is cash. Has the CBN come out with any specific contingency arrangements? Has the CBN considered places with difficult access, the remote, very remote areas, the mountainous areas, the riverine areas, in the creeks where there are no banks. So, so we believe that the time may not be too long if there is recognition of foreseeable disruptions in certain areas and processes. That if the CBN were to come out to say, we recognize this and these are the arrangements, then we will probably not have any serious concerns about the time and the process. The claim by some sections that we have so much money, we can't change it in 6 weeks, we believe that some special interests matter, which is not necessarily the interest of the entire economy. But for the entire economy, we believe that CBNs should be able to say and know and accept that there are certain foreseeable disruptions just because of the nature of that business, the payment, the agent payment people, and the nature of the location. There are several places in this country where in a whole local government, you probably have just one bank in a 50-kilometer area. It's strange to hear that in Lagos, but there are parts of this country where you don't have a bank in a 20-kilometer radius. And so when you want to make these kind of changes, you want to ring fence those situations and find solutions that address them. And then there will be a major concern about people who have stacked, pretty large volumes of money stacked somewhere, and they are worried about that. I don't think the CBN should worry about that, but to look at these specific foreseeable, easily foreseeable situations and prepare for them and address them. That's our view regarding this matter.
We have spoken of the, problems 2022 and also, some of what policymakers can do, especially this administration with the time that they have, so that it impacts even the ordinary Nigerian there. We'd like to appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Wish we had more time. Mr. Gabriel Idahosa, Deputy President, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Dr. Tokwe Fatru, an economist, who joined us from Abuja, also public policy scholar, and Professor Olawale Ogunkola, Professor of Economics, University of Ibadan, visiting Professor, London School of Economics in the UK. Thank you all for joining us on the program, and do have a happy new year.
Thank you.
Very much. Thank you.
We're back in a moment to join us again.
The patience of our members has been taxed beyond tolerable limit. NEC therefore resolved to embark on a 4-week rollover total and comprehensive strike beginning from Monday, 14th February 2020, which is today.
This sort of announcement is one that students of higher education institutions, their parents or guardians never wish to hear. Another round of strike which may snowball into an indefinite industrial action that will cripple learning activities in Nigerian public universities if the Academic Staff Union of Universities, ASUU, and the federal government do not come to actionable agreements.
The government has failed to fully implement the memorandum of action signed with the Academic Staff Union of University on 23rd December 2013. Payment of ASUU member salary and enrollment with integrated payroll and personnel management information system IPs, and non-adoption of the University Transparency and Academic Solution have continued to shortchange our members.
While ASUU and the federal government slug it out, with the union state chapters gearing up for full compliance to the 4-week total and comprehensive strike, students in public universities in the southwest to the southeast, south-south to the northern region who are holding the short end of the stick in this face-off bear their minds.
Our parents are there counting years you are going to school while you spend up to 19 years in school.
I finished secondary school in 2007. I spent 9 years at home before I finally gained admission. Time is going.
We're supposed to be graduating in 2 weeks' time. Our exam's supposed to start today. I have exam by 3 p.m. That's why I'm in school currently. But the ASUU members on meeting currently saying that all exams that have not been written from 8 till 12 will not be written again.
Honestly, I'm indifferent because they need to listen to these people. They need to listen to them. They are human beings. They need money.
Each side are claiming to be on the right path. And what I want the federal government now to consider is that, when two elephants are fighting, actually, it's the grass that suffer.
Protracted industrial actions are not alien to Nigerian tertiary institutions. But this is one strike that many believe should come to an end soon, with quick and lasting resolution of the issues. Yomi Otaigbe, Channels Television News.
Welcome back to 2022 in retrospect. We're focusing on education next. Yes, you've seen that report and at least some major developments what transpired concerning ASUU. We've got two gentlemen joining us next to weigh in on their thoughts of what happened to the sector this year. Professor Tunde Adeniro is a former Minister of Education, and then he joins us virtually, as well as Professor Biodun Ogunyemi, who himself is a former president of the Academic Staff Union of Universities. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us on 2022 in retrospect this evening.
You're most welcome.
Let me start with you. All right, Professor Ogunyemi, yes, it was a challenging time for the entire country, I might add. But in terms of the industrial action embarked upon by ASUU, or probably SANU, NASU, do you think, if you could speak for ASUU, is it now, should we consider it a thing of the past that we may not, or probably will not see this kind of prolonged strike to disrupt activities in the education sector ever again in the country, having seen how this has turned out?
Thank you very much, Chamberlain. I want to say that each time we talk about strike action, we look at symptoms and not the root causes. Strikes are always triggered by some underlying factors. Government not willing to fund education, government not keeping to pledges, the environment where lecturers are working are debilitating and are not conducive for productivity. The students are living in shanties. And we find that lecturers cannot actually be at their best and they cannot compete with their contemporaries globally. These are some of the key issues that culminate in strike actions that we see. However, I think three issues are at stake here. We need to talk about affordability versus quality. We need to talk about morale of the drivers of the system. And we also need to talk about the development of the country. If you say ASUU members should fold their arms and watch why the country goes under, why academics in Nigeria are reduced to mere tutors, recycling old ideas, lacking in capacity to carry out cutting-edge research, and being viewed as second-rate by their peers elsewhere in the world, then we are not helping our country. So I don't think any reasonable person can say, because we had a prolonged disagreement with an unwilling and unconcerned, insensitive government, that should be the death knell of advocacy and agitation for qualitative and affordable public education. I think we are missing the point. So to get our focus right, the three issues I mentioned earlier, I raised earlier, issue of affordable qualitative education, issue of morale and the operational environment, and of course the issue of the country's desire to compete in knowledge economy. Those three issues, if we put them in perspectives, there is no way you can say scholars who know their onions will not continue in their agitation, because they see what they are doing as a patriotic mission.
Let me just bring in Professor Denner on this, and pardon me, Professor Guyemi.
They will continue to insist that every
the sector is clearly a very important sector, because if you look at this year alone, the CBN recently published that between January and August, Nigerians spent $609.5 million on foreign education alone. Now that is huge. And those who still grapple, they can't understand how is it that government enters into an agreement with a body, they sign that agreement, government being a continuum, by the way, and then they're not able to fulfill their obligation having signed the agreement. You've been the Minister of Education. Could you help us understand what is it that we're missing? How does that ever happen in the first instance? Professor Daniel, can you hear me?
Well, I can hear you. I thought you were directing your question to Professor Guyemi. Well, I believe that...
No, it's to you, actually.
Okay, thank you very much. I believe that what happened in the past year were calamities at various sectors as far as education was concerned. And the refrain has been that of lamentations. You see the question of strikes or agitations and all that, they are resulting, as Professor Guyemi said, resulting from certain conditions. And when we look at it, and then we also look at the government, the government reaction, it becomes rather worrisome. But as far as I'm concerned, I try to look at it from a rather positive perspective, rather than lamenting the past. How do we move forward? Agreements have been reached in the past. Agreements are meant to be signed. And if there's any reason whatsoever that would delay or prevent the signing of that agreement or the implementation, then of course, all the parties involved will have to sit at the round table and sort it out. I look at it, part of the problem basically is this, because the education, like one of the panelists said when he was talking about the security situation in the country, that it also has to be to do with the collapse of the school system. Education is key to whatever we are doing in this country, and we do not take care of it, we are in deep trouble. Now, there are some issues that are involved. Why this stalemate? And I believe that both the government and ASUU, we have to sit back and reflect and take positive action. There is need for initiative in the coming years so that we will not be repeating what happened in the past years. For instance, at the time the agreement was signed, there were certain conditions. The prevailing conditions or the objective conditions have since changed somehow. And ASUU people, they are also patriotic. Their leaders are patriotic leaders. They do not mean evil for this country. They want a better educational system, and that is why they've been agitating. What I would want them to consider, the government and the ASUU, is that we look back. What has happened since that time? Today, now, when we add the private and the public universities together, we have about 200, 49 federal universities, 60 state universities. When you put all those together, the demands, this was not the situation at the time those agreements were signed, and things have changed. And you look, you continue to wonder, what is it that is preventing government from implementing? A number of factors are involved. And these have to be laid bare in the discussion between ASUU and the government. There should be transparency. There should be honesty. There should be commitment. Some people should not be seen as agitating for nothing or to be seen as if they are self-seeking and self-serving. This country is so important to everybody, and particularly to the coming generations, that we need to do everything to preserve it for them. And to preserve it for them means that education will have to be dealt with the way it should be handled. It is the most critical sector in Nigeria. It has to be treated as such. What has been happening all along is people see ASUU as fighting for their sector, as fighting for ASUU, forgetting that ASUU is central to whatever we evolve. There is no sector that is not touched by the activities of ASUU. And what we are now seeing as a result of government's reaction to the track action by ASUU or the industrial action is that we have a stalemate that is not good for this country. We see a situation in which we are going to pay the price for it in future. People are running away from the school system. Right from the lower levels, people go to the teaching profession because there's no other job to take. And that is sad. Whereas in the past, it used to be the very best are recruited to teach. And now you have a situation in which people pity those who were in the teaching profession. People lament on their behalf simply because we have not handled that sector properly. All the stakeholders must reflect for the new year, for the coming year, to have a change of attitude. There should be creative thinking. We cannot continue to do things the way we are, entertaining ourselves with the festival of strikes going on, and believe that this country will not suffer for it. We're already suffering for it, and we're going to suffer for it. We have in this, in the present situation, for example, when you add this past year now, 1,761,262 people sat for the JAM. When they go to the universities, who are the people to teach them? When the universities are being depleted as a result of what is happening, how are we going to man our institutions? We talk about the private sector. Who goes to the private sector, if not the products of this university? And in our various institutions, public institutions too, these are products of our various universities. We are destroying the future. And the earlier we got it right, the better.
And for a number of people, they would say that it goes both ways. This very long strike, which we suffered, you know, it also affected the government as much as it also affected, you know, the students and families. And we've talked about the other ricocheting effect. But to Professor Ogunyemi, also during this strike, the question I think is, will we see future strikes, especially for ASUU? And do you think, what's your take on the government's stance on the no work, no pay policy that we saw in August that it said about ASUU?
Well, I didn't get your question.
My first question is, will we see another strike, another ASUU strike in the future? Do you think we will have something like this that occurred in 2022 happening in 2023? And I would also like to know your take on the federal government's stance of the no work, no pay policy as it applied to ASUU this year.
Okay, well, I guess we are trying to say that we do not want to see another prolonged strike in 2023. I would say that it's a factor that we must understand very clearly what triggers strike action. I don't think anybody can promise you that there will be no strike. I don't think any ASUU leader can promise that. Because when our members' salaries are withheld, if government is saying no work, no pay, then at some point our members can say no pay, no work. The work they said our members did not do in 2022, between February and October, many universities have made our members to do the work. They have taught courses that were left untaught. They have conducted exams that were not conducted. They have graded scripts. And they are about graduating students that ordinarily should have been made to lose the session because government has refused to pay the salaries for those periods. So what that means is that the issue of no work, no pay, which applies to casual workers, does not have a place in the university system, because where you run course system, you need to complete prerequisite courses before you move to the next level. In our universities today, our members have been made to teach in arrears. If government is holding arrears of their salaries and government is not releasing the arrears of salaries, things may get to a head where our members will insist that their salaries that are withheld must be paid. And if that happens, I think it will be unreasonable. It will be against the logic of justice to say people that have been made to do their work in arrears should not be paid their salaries in arrears. That is number one. Number two is that there are issues that have been lingering since 2017. The issue of new salary package. We started negotiation in 2017. I don't think there is any negotiation in the history of trade unionism in Nigeria that has lasted that long. ASUU negotiated with government, teams were changed 3 times. Yet, there is no conclusive end. There is no product of the efforts. The issue of IPPIS. Our members were protesting against IPPIS, and they made direct allegations against the Accountant General of the Federation, who was the driver of IPPIS and the lead campaigner. But our members said IPPIS was a conduit pipe for corruption. And I think our members have since been proved right. It is in the public domain that a single government official could not account for 109 billion. That single person, at the same time, was able to present $900,000 in cash, as well as over 30 billion Naira delivered in cash to EFCC. So when you put all these factors together, the triggers are still there. Government is paying our members with a software that is amputating their salaries. They get 400,000 today. Next time, it comes to 150,000, and so on and so forth. We have negotiation that was concluded under Professor Nimi Briggs way back June 2022. But to sign the agreement, it was truncated. The person who has become the arrowhead of the ruling class attack on ASUU is still doing his business, thinking that they can castrate the union.
Professor,
I don't think that is fair. I don't think that is fair to the system, and I don't think that will help the morale of the drivers of the university system in Nigeria.
You have rehashed a lot of things that we witnessed in 2022, but I'd like to ask this question to Professor Laniro, and this is to perhaps what some would call the highs, in the education sector this year. The introduction of history, to basic schools, and the adoption of the mother tongue as a compulsory language of teaching. Just your brief thoughts on that as we wrap up.
I couldn't get you. I couldn't get your question.
Your thoughts on some of what I think are the highs of the administration in education, the introduction of mother tongue as a language, compulsory medium of instruction in primary schools, and introduction of history, which used to be taught in basic primary schools.
I think there's some problem at your end with the connection. I couldn't get the question.
Chamberlain, perhaps you can help me.
Well, Prof, I don't know if you can hear from here. She was talking about the adoption of the mother tongue in schools as announced by the federal government. What impact do you think that will have?
The schools announced by the federal government? Chamberlain.
The mother tongue policy.
The education policy?
Okay, I think the mother tongue policy announced by the government in schools so that we perhaps learn languages or learn with our native tongue in different schools in the country.
Well, if I got you right, Chamberlain, I think there's some echoing. What I could get from you is that you are talking about some schools announced by the federal government. If that is what you meant, what I can make out of that is that whatever is
perhaps Professor
Okay,
Guyemi.
well, I apologize for that. I think we couldn't make out the communication there. But yes, ASUU strike was a big one, but don't forget there's also the primary, tertiary, and secondary as well. Well, we have to thank both of them, Professor Tunde Adenuran, former Minister of Education, as well as Professor Biodun Ogunyemi, who himself is a former president of the Academic Staff Union of Universities. We will be back in just a moment here on 2022 in retrospect. Stay with us.
Bayelsa State in south-south Nigeria has a landmass of 10,773 kilometers, and more than half of this has been covered by floods. Currently, the most common mode of transportation is the use of canoe, and those who will swim struggle through the water to get to their destinations. Even our crew had to wade through the water to access the cemetery at Azikoro village, and our findings are mind-boggling.
This is the rapper.
Genetic.
I wish. Sorry.
As we were in the cemetery, I saw something flowing out, coming out when the water is coming. Immediately I saw it, that first one was casket with it come outside. Then the second one that we bury without casket to float and come outside. I don't know what to do, so I need to drag them with my colleagues to the corner sides of the cemetery to find where to put them, because the corner side of the cemetery, that time the water was not up to this level. So we look for a solution because we are living there with our family and our children.
The health implication of this is unimaginable, and residents believe those in authority should act immediately by fumigating the community and perhaps evacuating residents of the area to safety.
We're talking about discharge of effluents that are full of bacteria into this water. And of course, the underground water is also affected. And that means a very serious health threat to humans that are living within this place. And I think that this is the premise, one of the very logical reasons why inhabitants of this community are appealing very passionately and strongly to the governor that there is now need, in the face of what we have seen, there is need for the cemetery to be shut down and the cemetery to be relocated to a better place.
The governor of the state, Doyediri, embarks on an aerial tour of affected communities already submerged and assures the people that he has ordered more relief materials to be brought into the state through the waterways.
We have been totally separated from the rest of the world. So it's pathetic. It's something that you can't even wish your enemy to be. I'm happy that the federal government responded by saying that they have not abandoned Bayelsa State and gave immediate order to all those emergency departments and agencies and all federal agencies to immediately come to the aid of Bayelsa State.
Whatever in my house, you go reach my neck. You go reach my neck. See me with my wife, the park they go.
This is perhaps the most devastating flood recorded in the state in many years. Properties submerged, valuables lost, schools unable to resume, marketplaces swept away, and health centers taken over by the floods. And there's no doubt that it will take the state and the people a long time to recover from this huge catastrophe.
Welcome back. 2022 in retrospect. Now, in spite of the warnings by various government agencies for Nigerians to brace up for floods this year, many communities were still caught napping. Well, joining us to talk more about this, we're moving into the environment sector and also climate change. We have here in Lagos, Oluwafemi Akimbode, Executive Director, Corporate Accountability and Public Participation Africa. Welcome to the program.
Good to be here.
To join us as well is Professor Andrew Olufemi, Professor of Geography and Environmental Management, University of Port Harcourt. He joins us via Zoom from Port Harcourt. Thank you and welcome to the program.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Well, let's begin with the visuals that we saw, and I'd like to start with you here in Lagos. And this is, have we recovered from that overwhelming disaster flood we saw this year?
We cannot recover from that of this year when we have not recovered from the flood of 2012. So I happen to be part of the team that did the report on the 2012 flood, in which then we call the Great Flood, without knowing that there was also going to be the 2022 flood. And sometimes last year, I was driving to Abuja, and I just decided to veer off the main road to visit some of those communities at Dankolo, around Lokoja, and those areas. And of course, I still saw there some of the displaced families that are yet to be settled. Despite the enormous amount of money that were raised then under the Jonathan government for, as it was advertised, relief for victims of that flood. So I would say, if I have to speak from experience, it's just practically impossible in our climb in this country for those victims of just few months or few weeks ago to have recovered. And of course, it's a year of monumental climate crisis. Of course, it started right away from Yobe in July, and nothing was done, and the waters came down. By August, it's already in Lokoja, and then up till to the southern part, and of course from the visual that you've seen. So, not only in Bayelsa, there was another state in the north. I'm not sure that it was Yobe or Niger, and that the flood also, took over a cemetery. About 1,500 corpses were uprooted. There was a rice farm of about $15 million that were destroyed. How do you recover from close to 1,000 deaths, close to 1 million people displaced? And to make matters worse, you begin to see that people in government that were supposed to assuage, to bring hope, succor to our people, started blaming God. The waters that you've seen was, rained from God. So there were people who also spoke about, we need 30 years to be able to come out with plans to undo flood. And of course, we didn't see the kind of carefully planned out, carefully executed, impact targeted kind of response from the disaster management agencies of the country. So I don't think the people, and from reports that we are getting actually, from the number of houses that were destroyed, how many of the families have actually been relocated, how many of them have been taken care of. I mean, we've not seen such kind of what can bring recovery at this point.
Professor Olufemi, to you, do you agree with my guest in the studio who says we haven't finished from the effects of 2012, not to mention what we're going through this year in terms of the recovery of the flooding? Do you think that the government, the agencies responsible were not prepared?
Yes, please. I want to agree with what the speaker just said. And let me just start by reading something that was said by the United Nations Secretary General. He said, humanity has a choice, cooperate or perish. In Nigeria, unless we are intentional about preparedness, especially dealing with flood issues, we won't be able to go far. So I was also part of the team that covered River State post-assessment of that 2012 flood. We had opportunity to also organize other programs that also made us to go to the field to actually look at interface with people, what were their experiences and what was the response from the government. But the story is still the same until we got into where we are in 2022. So we're not doing so much. Yes, we have all the programs, we have all the documents, we have all the policies out there. But when it comes to implementing those policies to the letter and to get results out of all of those things, that is where we're supposed to be going to, and not all these activities that are not actually helping out in reducing the challenges that people are going through. You know, Nigeria is vulnerable to flood. And with what happened in COP27 this year, it also shows that even the United Nations, the global world is aware that Nigeria is under flood and Nigeria is not doing so much to stop or manage this issue.
You say, Professor, is as a result of global warming.
Hello?
Professor Olufemi, yes. How much would you say, how much of this, what we're going through, would you say is as a result of global warming?
Please, there's a breaking network. I'm not hearing you quite well.
No worries. Let's come to the guest in Lagos. How much would you say is as a result of global warming, climate change, and that this is what the government and policymakers should begin to look into?
So I said earlier by saying that 2022 actually is a year of, extreme weather meltdown. Whether you're talking about the Hurricane Naira, you're talking about the drying up of water in some parts of Europe, heat waves and the rest of them. So you could see that actually the climate change calamity is here. And when you add the vulnerability of our continent with the global, the climate heating up, then you see more of those extreme weathers. And I just want to dissuade the minds of Nigerians that look at the calculation of 2012 and 2022, and some people are beginning to postulate that, okay, it's going to be the next 10 years. There's nothing scientific to show that this flood will wait till 10 years. It can happen again next year, all right? But coming back to what you have said, the intensity of, weather variation that we'll see now, it's not what we've seen before, all right? So we begin to see more of these disasters or the drying up of Lake Chad, of drought in the north, and then you see highly intensified rain, and then of course you then see the flood that we begin to see. So a great deal of this is attributable to climate change, and of course it's also the issue of some carelessness on the part of the Nigerian government. Either you like it or not, the Lado Dam in Cameroon, even when the minister admitted that there is just 1%, that 1% itself, it's something we need to worry about. So climate change, the lack of preparedness on the part of the Nigerian, the Nigerian government, it's also part of.
But what about the people themselves?
Now,
people living close to the flood.
So when you look at the way this works, is that we've given people a part of our, sovereignty to help shape our responses to things. So you do have this flood starting from Yobe in July. And then you expect that since NIMET had predicted that there will be flood in over 27 states of 37 states of the Federation, then you have a government that will have set up maybe a committee or a task force or to be able to mobilize Nigerian people to prepare for the flood. I mean, in cases that you've seen, in extreme weather cases, government do evacuate people along the flood lines and the rest of them. Please, let's be very serious about 2022. This flood cut off the federal capital of our nation for several weeks. Vehicles could not cross from Lokoja to Abuja. This is becoming more of a security issue. Do you understand? I mean, for people at work, what do? The first thing you do is cut the supply lines of your enemy. So we're beginning to see that even flood can be used as a weapon against our government. So it is a federal responsibility of government. Now, a lot of the time, what governments, people, the kind of government we have, want to do is to shift the blame to the victims. And so they want to say, what are the ordinary people? Are people dumping waste on River Niger, for Christ's sake? There is a huge difference between urban flood and the kind of flood we're talking about that is ruining almost the entire country. Yes, there are urban floods that are also caused by the non-enforcement of, town planning rules, the usual thing that they need to go and educate Nigerians. And I also want to ask people, when some of us were growing up, all right, in the days of the whole radio stations and the rest of them, there used to be like public address system advising Nigerians all over the radio, all over TV stations say, do not dump garbage in the waters. Do you understand? Where are those? So a great deal of these is about government taking over the responsibility. It's about corporations that are fueling climate change, causing the crisis to be made to be accountable. And then those things that fuel climate change needs to stop.
I want to talk about another issue, slightly, but still on environment. And this goes to Professor Olufemi, and hoping you can hear me now. And this is with regards to the environment, especially in the Niger Delta where you are, the illegal bunkering and how that is polluting the environment.
Yeah, this has been quite a huge challenge for us, especially in the Niger Delta environment. Especially, I had an opportunity to travel over waters recently, and you can just feel the impact and the import of the effort that the state governor put in place, at least to reduce the activities of this bunkering. Because in the past, when you are traveling over water, you see a lot of seepages on water, and the kind of emitting air on the sea, it's quite dangerous to head. But it's been a challenge. It has affected aquatic resources, and has also affected even the transportation itself and so many other activities that the waterways or water resources are meant to provide for the Niger Delta. And so I think in the coming year, we expect that we need to do more to be able to enhance the cleanup to ensure that the waterways, especially in the Niger Deltas, are cleared up. Now, a lot of some of the challenges we do have is this deposition on the waterways, and a lot of debris that covers up the waterways are not cleaned up. And at the end of the day, each time there's an excess water and excess rain, then it flows out of the banks and creates a lot of problems for us. And this is peculiarly so because, at the downstreams where the Niger Delta is, we have a lot of all these waterways that are receiving the deposition, the transported debris from the upper streams, and so has created a lot of issues, a lot of problems. Please, my name is Obafemi, not Olufemi, please. Andrew Obafemi, please correct that. Thank you.
Also on that issue, is that a problem for you? I know you also attended COP27.
Yeah, I mean, we did attend COP27, and On the issue of, let's say, bunkering, there's the local parlance called the pole fire. And of course, you can link that with what is called the soot problem in Port Harcourt. Yeah, so if you've been following the so-called big discovery of, bunkering and activities going on in the Niger Delta, I think you could see clearly now that, the big guys are not the locals behind the majority of the problems. So of course, we have those people that are frying diesel and the rest of them. And I think that the issue is about how do you have community stakeholdership in development. When you do have, mining going on in your communities that actually inflict pains and, destroy your environment, and then people that are not that are not employed, that begin to look for ways to survive. Either ways you want to take a look at that, you have to look at it holistically, all right? Go after the big guys who are causing some of these problems, look at how the community can be part of your security system and how you can make them stakeholders in the kind of development that you do, and even make that development useful for them. You cannot continue to drill oil in my community and I don't have electricity, all right? And back to COP27. COP27 was called African COP because it was supposed to throw up issues relating to the continent. Being a continent that contributes less than 4% to global warming, and then the major receiving continent in terms of the impacts of climate change. And so we went to COP with the expectation for the most important thing is that emissions should reduce at source, and that we should be able to get commitment on real solutions as against, false solutions like the net zero and the rest of them. It was a tough COP. It was invaded by, the same polluters who want to be the ones to create the problem. You don't call mosquitoes to come and solve malaria. Neither could the fossil fuel industry be the ones to provide answer. The market economy actually created the climate change problem. Market cannot solve that problem. However, COP created an avenue for us as campaigners around the world to raise, the issues. And
let me just ask you this.
Chamberlain has something.
Yeah, okay. Now, just a minute, Mr. Kimberly. You started out by painting a grim picture that we didn't recover or have not recovered from the previous flood, and it's difficult to recover from this particular one in 2022, and you were part of those who came up with the report. And listening to that, of course, a lot of people will be concerned about that. But if you were to recommend how we should approach this flooding that happened now, because lots of people will talk about the warnings that preceded this one and how there will be subsequent warnings, but what we do will be of very, very huge consequence, either positively or otherwise. So in conclusion now, could you give us your recommendation in terms of how we should approach these kind of issues moving forward in this country?
I think the first thing I'll say, Timberlane, is that we should put round peg in round holes and the square peg in square holes. If a minister is telling you that it will take them, take 30 years before we can have concrete response to this, then we for lack of another word, is to say he doesn't understand his job very well. If another minister, again, has been given the task of setting up a committee to come up with solutions for 90 days, and I'm not sure after the announcement of the setting up of that committee, you've heard anything about what they could do. I don't really think that the current team can, give us the kind of solution. However, what they need to do is to actually map out what I would call the environmental hotspots in Nigeria as regards to flood. Let us look at the communities that are flood prone. In fact, there are some quick wins that they could get. They speak about Lado not telling them when they want to, discharge water. You could almost immediately send up a presidential committee to discuss with the government of Cameroon to say, look, this is what has happened to our citizens as a result of the flood. And then let us begin to enforce this MOU between both countries about discharge of water. There is supposed to be a outside dam to serve as a buffer between when Lado releases water. I mean, I will expect that this current government will set up a committee to look at the visibility of creating that dam. And as I said earlier, is that more importantly is that we're talking about people and livelihoods. People died. You know, people lost their homes. You want to see a government that will immediately begin to bring support to the people. Look at Bayelsa. Look at East West Road. That road was completely destroyed. I mean, you want to begin to see an emergency fund, I mean, repairing that road because people suffered and they continue to suffer on those roads. So it's a national emergency, not even the 90 days that was given by Mr. President for him to see a report. There are things that could be done immediately. And of course, we should also have the long-term plan of how to completely address this issue of this perennial flooding in Nigeria as a result of water flowing from Benue down to Bayelsa, and then you see the entire state covered with flood and destroying lives and property.
Professor Olufemi, your parting words.
Yeah, oh, okay, yeah, please, I corrected my name, Obafemi, not Olufemi.
I do beg your pardon.
Yes, I agree with my colleagues that have spoken out there. You know, I want to suggest that, you know, we must take out politics from professional services that require immediate actions. For instance, you know, since NEMA was pulled out from where it used to be and put under a ministry that lacks capacity to be able to handle disaster issues, we are not going forward, especially in that direction. So my parting word is that, like my colleague said, we should try to allow professionals to handle professional activities that will help us to be able to manage our flood issues in this country. Of course, there are even the United Nations, like I said earlier, acknowledge the fact that, you know, Nigeria is under perennial flooding, and there's a fund that is being set up. But that fund, unless there is trust, there's mutual trust amongst and within the system, to be able to have people that will be entrusted to manage some of those when it come, then it becomes a challenge. Finally, I want to say that we must see what NEMA is doing, how we can increase the capacity of NEMA, which is what the Constitution recognizes as the agency to manage flooding and all those flooding issues in this country. We can rejig what NEMA is doing by ensuring that the right persons are made to head specific activities. For instance, recently there was a document presented to us and maybe commissioned by the federal government on this flood response. But it took so long for that flood response framework to come up. And even after launching the framework, the issue is, unless we also allow the researchers, there are 6 centers that were established by NEMA across Nigeria. They should allow evidence-based information to be provided by all of these centers to enhance what the government will be able to do to achieve a better response to managing disaster.
Thank you, Professor. And you know, talking about some of the functions of NEMA, it's also, you know, there were so many other things that occurred. The building collapsed, there were fire outbreaks. So quite a lot, you know, for the administration. Also next year, I mean, coming administration to look at, especially in curbing all of these issues with our environment. We'd like to thank you, Professor Andrew Obafemi. Thank you so much, Professor of Geography and Environmental Management, University of Port Harcourt, and thank you, Mr. Olufemi Akinbode, Executive Director, Corporate Accountability, Public Participation Africa. Thank you for joining us on the program, and Happy New Year to both of you.
Thank you. Happy New Year.
When we return is our final moments on the program. Stay with us.
One of the highlights of 2022 as well in the broadcast industry is that Channels Television won the Media Merit Award for the Television Station of the Year for the 15th time. Have a look.
It's an evening event to reward hard work and ingenuity in the media landscape, and this year's edition is special. It's the 30th of the series. The trusted chair, a veteran in the industry, shares his experience with the audience as a war journalist himself, but then reflects on the brutal killing of 2 young journalists during the Liberian War. He says journalism is a challenging profession.
Members of the profession have worked assiduously to defend freedom of the press, which provides the oxygen that keeps democracy as a system, its values, and its institutions alive. If free press dies, democracy shall inevitably go with it.
For a 30-year tradition, the pedigree and credibility of the award have been designed and sustained over the years with a list of criteria to guide the assessors.
The level of adherence to rules of the regulatory body, the percentage of local content, response to financial obligations internally and to regulatory bodies, public acceptance and perception of the media house, quality of programming and transmission, quality of reproduction in the case of newspapers, level of professionalism in content, objectivity, fairness, and balance. Finally, industrial harmony within the organization.
Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu is the chief host and was accompanied to the event by a large entourage. He urges the media to exercise a high level of professionalism as they go about their business.
We're in call for great circumspection and great fidelity to the timeless principles of journalism. Accuracy is critical, fairness at all times, balanced reportage, integrity, I imagine, is critical at all times. Your standards must never be lowered for anything, and definitely not in this age in which social media and internet has enabled the easy amplification of fake news and malicious report, hate speeches that are intended to give undue political advantage or to divide our society or even derail this our democracy.
For the Latif Jakonde Prize for Political Reporter of the Year are...
The award nominations are called, most of which are in the print category.
The Punch.
Then the broadcast media. The awards range from the reporter, presenter, producer of the year to the station of the year.
TVC.
NBC Prize for Television Station of the Year.
And the best is saved for the last, the Best TV Station of the Year award.
The winner is Channels Television.
For the champion, stand up, stand up, stand up. For the champion, stand up.
I'd like, on behalf of the chairman, Channels Media Group, Dr. John Momo, and his lovely wife, to say a big thank you to the organizers of this event. We didn't see this coming because we've won this award for 14 times. This is the 15th time we'll be winning this award. We'd like to say that we are dedicating it to the staff of Channels TV, people who have worked so hard for this over the years. This award is for them. I thank you all, and I thank you indeed.
The NMMA has over 1,000 alumni who have been found worthy of recognition for their hard work in various media organizations across different platforms over the years. And for many, this award is a tonic for more work. Dari Idu, Channels Television News.
So Chamberlain, you've heard it, it's more work from Dare. He said it there just as he ended that report.
Well, what a year it's been. I tell you, I know that, well, of course, it's normal, it's natural. That's a maxim. The reward for success is more work. And yours truly, of course, I'm not shy away from that, unless you're trying to tell me something else, Melissa.
Not at all. It's across board. Congratulations also to the management of Channels Television that keeps pushing us, each and every day. But just before we go, we leave you with the memories of some icons that died within the year 2022, both in Nigeria and outside. Well, I guess...
Wow, what a year, and how time flies. And yes, indeed, it's 2022. In retrospect, we are out of time here. But the good news is you are the pilot, even if time flies. And you have to make the most of it in 2023. We'd like to thank you all for watching and for being here. We'll see you next time. Happy New Year to all of you. I'm Chamberlain, so goodbye.
We're looking back on the challenges faced and take forward the precious lessons learned. Wishing you the very best in 2023. From all of us here at Channels Television, Happy New Year.